Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, where curiosity slows down, strange places become quiet stories, and the world's most beautiful mysteries are allowed to breathe for a while before we look too closely. Tonight, we're travelling to a place that looks, at first glance, almost too peaceful to be frightening. A round opening in clear blue water, a quiet spring in the Texas hill country, a natural pool where sunlight slips down through the surface and makes the water look clean enough to be made of glass. It is called Jacob's Well, and for many visitors the first feeling it gives is not fear. It is wonder. You look at it and think, how can something so small seem so deep? How can something so inviting hold so much darkness underneath? And how exactly does a swimming hole become a warning? Before we drift down into that question, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Are you somewhere warm, with windows open and night insects making their tiny steady noises outside? Are you tucked away somewhere cold, with a blanket pulled up and a cup of tea nearby, perhaps already too far away to drink before it goes lukewarm, as tea often does when the universe notices you're comfortable? And have you ever stood beside clear water and felt that odd little pull to look deeper? Not to jump in necessarily, not to be reckless, just to lean over and stare, because the eye wants to know what the dark is hiding. If you find this story calming, interesting, or simply a gentle place to rest your thoughts for a while, I'd be grateful if you gave the video a like and subscribed. It helps this quiet corner of the internet reach other people who enjoy soft science, strange history, and the kind of stories that make the world feel a little larger just before sleep. And as always, I do hope this is soothing enough to help you unwind, but not so gripping that you find yourself lying awake at 3 a.m, searching pictures of underwater caves and questioning the confidence of every person who has ever said, "I'll only be gone for a minute." So settle in, let your shoulders loosen, let the day move a little farther away. Tonight, we are not rushing. We're not diving quickly. We're standing at the edge of the water and taking our time. Jacob's Well sits near Wimberley, Texas in Hays County, inside what is now Jacob's Well Natural Area. It is an artesian spring fed by the Trinity Aquifer, and it forms the headwaters of Cypress Creek, a creek that has shaped life, land, recreation, and memory in that part of the hill country for generations. The natural area is protected today, and public rules now prohibit scuba diving there, a rule that makes much more sense once you understand what lies below the surface. Official local information describes the site as little over 81 acres, with the spring acting as a visible sign of the water moving through the aquifer beneath it. On a normal day in healthier conditions, the spring has been known for a strong flow of cold water, though drought and groundwater concerns have changed that story in recent years. For now, just picture the place as many people first remember it. Limestone, sun, trees, a clear pool, a round blue opening in the bed of the creek. At the surface, Jacob's Well does not look like a monster. That is part of its power. It does not roar, it does not boil, it does not slap the rocks with huge waves, or announce danger with dramatic music, which would be helpful, frankly, and would save everyone a great deal of confusion. It simply sits there, calm and beautiful, with water so clear that swimmers can look down into the entrance and feel as though they are floating above a doorway. A doorway to what exactly depends on how much training you have, how much respect you bring with you, and whether you understand that nature is not always safer when it is pretty. That is one of the strange things about dangerous places. We often expect them to look dangerous. We expect sharp cliffs, storm clouds, warning signs, angry seas, maybe a vulture circling overhead if the location is really committed to the role. But Jacob's Well is not like that. This danger is quiet. It is orderly. It is geological. It waits in the shape of the cave itself. The entrance drops into a submerged system of passages and chambers, and what looks from above like a simple deep hole becomes, below the surface, a difficult underwater cave. Hayes County's own educational material says cave divers with the Jacobs Well Exploration Project have mapped more than 6,000 feet of underwater passage, with a maximum depth of 137 feet. That is not a swimming hole in the usual sense. That is a hidden system of limestone corridors with no open air once you're inside, no daylight after a certain point, and no easy forgiveness if a diver makes a mistake. And yet, if you only see photographs, you might not feel that at first. You might see bright water, pale rock, summer legs dangling near the edge, people jumping in and climbing out with the cheerful confidence of anyone who has not read the fine print written in stone below them. The entrance is often described as roughly circular, a natural shaft that seems to invite the human imagination. It looks like a blue eye. It looks like a well in the old sense, a place where water rises from below, useful and precious. It looks like the sort of place someone would name, protect, visit, photograph and remember, and people have done all of those things. For a long time, Jacobs Well was more than a strange geological feature. It was part of local life. People came to see it, swim near it, jump into it, and tell stories about it afterward. The hill country has many places where water and limestone meet in beautiful ways, and Jacobs Well belongs to that family of landscapes that seem designed to make people pause. Clear water in a hot climate has a way of making even careful adults briefly become children. The mind sees coolness and relief before it sees risk. It says, "That looks refreshing." It does not immediately say, "That is an overhead cave environment with restrictions, silt, false exits, and no breathable air." The brain, bless its optimistic little filing system, sometimes puts the warning label in the wrong drawer. But beneath that inviting surface is a very different place. The water stays cold, about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and the visibility can be excellent. That clarity is part of the beauty, but also part of the danger. Clear water can create confidence. It lets you see just enough to want to see more. A murky hole might repel you. A clear one invites you to investigate, and investigation, when it involves underwater caves, is not a casual thing. Cave diving is a specialised discipline with its own training, equipment, procedures, and very strict respect for limits. Recreational diving in open water is one thing. Diving into a flooded cave is another entirely. In open water, if something goes wrong, up is usually an option. In a cave, up may be rock. The way out is not simply above you. It is behind you, through the same path you followed in, and that path can become confusing, narrow, clouded with silt, or suddenly much harder to pass than it seemed on the way in. That is where Jacobs Well turns from beautiful to unforgiving. Not because it is evil, not because it wants anything. Nature does not need intentions to be dangerous. A cave is not cruel. A current is not malicious. A narrow passage does not wake up in the morning and decide to be difficult after breakfast. It simply exists according to its shape, its flow, its rock, its history, and the physics of air, water, pressure, and panic. The danger comes when a human being enters that environment without enough preparation, or goes farther than planned, or believes that the way back will be as simple as the way in. At least 8 people lost their lives diving in Jacobs Well between 1960 and 1985, according to Hayes County's educational page, and the same local material also notes that at least 9 people have died scuba diving there from the 1960s through the 1980s. Other local reporting also gives 9 confirmed diving deaths, and describes the cave as having false chambers, areas that look like exits but are not, and restrictions as narrow as 15 inches. Those numbers are not included here to sensationalize the place. They matter because they remind us that the story is not just about a famous swimming hole. It is about real people, real families, and real moments when confidence met an environment that did not allow much room for error. There is a reason places like this become legends. A simple pool is easy to understand. A deep cave under clear water is not. When a place is beautiful, dangerous, and partly hidden, people fill the unseen parts with stories. Some stories are careful and factual, others grow larger each time they are retold. That happens with caves, wells, forests, old mines, abandoned buildings, and anywhere else the human mind can look into darkness and hear its own imagination echoing back. Jacob's Well has gathered that kind of attention. It appears in travel pieces, local histories, diving discussions, viral images, and the uneasy little corner of the internet where people stare at deep water and say, quite reasonably, no thank you. But tonight, we're going to move slowly through the real reasons it fascinates people, not just the fear, not just the fatal accidents, not just the photographs that make the well look bottomless. We're going to look at the spring itself, the geology that made it, the water that carved it, the divers who explored it, and the hard lessons that came from those who went in and did not come back. We will also look at why Jacob's Well is not only a danger story, it is also a conservation story, a water story, and a reminder that natural beauty often depends on systems much larger than the single place we see. Because Jacob's Well is not separate from the land around it, it is connected to the aquifer, the creek, the rainfall, the limestone, the development above ground, and the people who use water from the same underground source. In recent years, drought and low flow have affected the well, and swimming has been closed for long periods because the spring's conditions have not been safe or healthy enough for that use. That's a quieter kind of danger, less dramatic than a cave dive and much less likely to become a movie trailer, but important all the same. A spring that once seemed constant can weaken. A place people think of as timeless can change within a lifetime. Water, especially groundwater, often feels invisible until it is missing. Still, the story begins with that first look down. Imagine standing on the limestone edge on a warm day. The trees are still. The water below is so clear that depth becomes difficult to judge. The opening looks dark in the middle, blue around the edges, bright where the sun touches it. People might be laughing nearby. Someone might be taking a photograph. Someone else might be pretending they're not nervous before jumping in, a performance known to almost every swimming hole in the world. The surface tells one story. The cave beneath tells another. And for a moment, both stories occupy the same small circle of water. That contrast is what makes Jacob's Well so gripping. It is not a dangerous place that looks ugly. It is a dangerous place that looks peaceful. It is not hidden behind a locked metal door in an industrial site with a skull painted on it, which would at least be honest. It is out in nature, under the sky, framed by rock and trees. The same qualities that make people admire it are the qualities that can make them underestimate it. Clear water, calm water, cold water, a visible entrance, a sense that, because others have gone there, it must be manageable. Humans are social creatures. We borrow confidence from the behaviour of others. If someone else jumped, maybe it is fine. If someone else swam over the opening, maybe there is nothing to worry about. If someone else went a little deeper, maybe a little deeper is still safe. But a little deeper is sometimes where a place changes. At Jacob's Well, the boundary between recreation and serious danger is not marked by a wall. It is not always obvious to the eye. One moment you're in a beautiful spring. A little farther in, you're entering an underwater cave system where the rules are completely different. That is an important lesson, and it applies far beyond diving. Some risks do not announce themselves at the beginning. They appear only after you have already moved forward, when turning around is harder than expected. The calm surface is not a lie, exactly. It is simply incomplete information. As we move into the story, it helps to hold two ideas at once. Jacob's Well is beautiful, and Jacob's Well is dangerous. One truth does not cancel the other. In fact, they are tangled together. The beauty is part of why people come close. The danger is part of why the place must be respected. And respect in this case does not mean fear in a noisy, panicked sense. It means understanding. It means accepting that a natural place can be lovely without being safe for everything we might want to do there. It means knowing when admiration should stay at the surface. There is something almost ordinary about that lesson, which may be why we forget it so often. We know in daily life that not every door should be opened, not every road should be followed, not every late-night snack should include shredded cheese directly from the bag, though humanity continues to test that one with impressive dedication. Yet when a place is beautiful, curiosity becomes persuasive. Curiosity says, just look closer, just one more step, just a little more. And many discoveries in human history began that way. Curiosity is not the enemy. Without it, we would know very little about caves, springs, oceans, stars, or ourselves. But curiosity needs a companion. It needs caution walking beside it, carrying the checklist and occasionally saying very gently, perhaps not today. Jacob's Well has seen both kinds of curiosity. The careful kind used by trained cave divers and researchers who map, document and study the system, and the dangerous kind used by people who moved into a place they were not prepared to handle. The difference between those two kinds of curiosity is not bravery, it is preparation, it is humility, it is the understanding that some environments do not care how confident you feel. They care only whether you have enough air, enough training, enough visibility, enough line, enough discipline, and enough sense to turn back before the cave decides the lesson for you. So tonight, as your room grows quieter and the outside world softens at the edges, we will begin at the surface of Jacob's Well. We will look at why it appears so inviting, why it became such a memorable place in the Texas Hill Country, and why that dark opening under the blue water has pulled so many eyes toward it. Then we will follow the water downward in our imagination, not as thrill seekers, but as careful observers. We will let the story unfold slowly, from clear sunlight to limestone passages, from summer swimming to cave diving danger, from local landmark to cautionary tale. For now, take one last easy breath at the edge of the spring. Picture the water resting in its round stone bowl. Picture the sunlight touching the surface. Picture the opening below, quiet and dark, not moving, not speaking, not warning anyone in a voice they can hear. The first mystery of Jacob's Well is not that it is deadly. The first mystery is that it is so beautiful first. At first, Jacob's Well does not ask you to be afraid. It sits low in the limestone, still and round, with water gathered in a natural opening that looks almost too neat to have been made by ordinary erosion. If you came upon it without knowing its history, you might think of it as a hidden swimming spot, the kind of place someone tells you about only after deciding you are responsible enough not to bring a speaker, leave trash, or say something like, "This would be a great place to do a backflip," which is usually the beginning of several bad decisions wearing sunglasses. The surface looks calm, the water looks clean, the surrounding trees soften the scene. Nothing about it shouts, nothing about it warns in the way we often expect danger to warn. Jacob's Well is in Wimberley, Texas, inside Jacob's Well Natural Area, an 81-acre protected park in Hays County. The spring is fed by the Trinity Aquifer and forms the headwaters of Cypress Creek, which then flows through the local landscape and toward the Blanco River. Hays County describes the well as a spring that has typically supplied millions of gallons of water per day, supporting downstream water needs, recreation, and wildlife, though drought and groundwater stress have changed its condition in recent years. But facts like those are not usually what people notice first. What they notice first is the opening. It is not large in the way the ocean is large. It is not grand like a canyon or wide like a lake. It is a small, focused kind of place, a circle of water with a dark centre. The eye falls into it before the body does. That is part of what makes it feel so strange. Most swimming holes spread outward. Jacob's Well seems to pull attention downward. You stand near the edge, and the landscape suddenly has a point. Rock, water, shade, sunlight, all of it gathers around that one blue dark entrance. There are places that feel like they belong completely to the surface of the world. A meadow, a beach, a trail. A shallow creek where minnows flicker around your ankles and everyone understands the rules. Jacob's Well does not feel like that. It feels like the surface is only the lid. The real place is underneath. And once you realise that, the calm water begins to look different. Not less beautiful exactly, just less simple. The strange thing is that the entrance does not need to be hidden to feel mysterious. It is right there. People have photographed it for years. Visitors have walked up to it, looked down and felt the same small pause. A visible opening can still feel secret if you cannot see where it goes. A door in a wall is ordinary because you understand rooms. A hole in clear water is different. Your mind can follow it for only a short distance before imagination has to take over, and imagination is not always a careful guide. It tends to pack a flashlight, forget the map, and whisper, "Well, that looks interesting." From above, the spring gives the impression of depth almost immediately. The water has often been clear enough for people to see the shape of the opening below the surface. That clarity is important. If the water were muddy or opaque, Jacob's Well might feel more obviously off limits. Murky water tells the average person, perhaps keep your toes to yourself. Clear water says, look how much you can see. And that is precisely the trick. You can see enough to become curious, but not enough to understand. The Jacob's Well Exploration Project describes the site as a perennial spring with cold, clear water rising from the Trinity Aquifer into Cypress Creek, and beyond the sunlit surface is an extensive underwater cave system. The main conduit, known as a tunnel, extends about 4,500 feet from the spring opening, while another passage, B Tunnel, branches away for about 1,500 feet. The deepest mapped point is 137 feet. That is the part the surface does not explain. A visitor standing above the well sees a natural pool. A cave diver sees an overhead environment, a network of submerged passageways where the route out matters more than the view in. Those are two very different ways of looking at the same water. One is a summer image. The other is a technical problem with consequences. And between those two views is the reason Jacob's Well has become such a powerful, cautionary place. Still, before the fear enters the story, it is worth giving the beauty its fair space. Because Jacob's Well is beautiful, not in a loud way, not in a polished resort way. It does not have tiled edges or umbrellas or a tidy little snack bar where someone named Brad charges $12 for a lemonade that tastes mostly like optimism. Its beauty is older and rougher. The limestone bed, the trees, the light, the green of the creek corridor, the clear water resting in a round opening. It feels shaped, but not designed. It feels like something the land made slowly, without checking whether humans would find it convenient, and perhaps that is why people respond to it so strongly. There is something deeply satisfying about a natural shape that looks almost intentional. A round hole in stone, a spring rising from below, a pool clear enough to show its own danger. The mind wants to turn it into a symbol, even if we are trying to be practical. People call it a well because that is what it resembles, a shaft, a source, a place where water comes up from underground. But unlike the wells in old villages, where buckets lowered and rose with simple purpose, this one opens into a cave. The name feels familiar. The place is not. A true portal, in the ordinary sense, is a passage from one place to another. Jacob's Well is not a portal to another world. Despite what the imagination might enjoy after midnight, it is a spring opening into a submerged cave system. That is the plain version. But the feeling it creates is not plain. The surface world is warm, bright and breathable. The hidden world below is cold, enclosed, dark and made of stone. One body of water holds both. That contrast makes it feel like a threshold, and thresholds do something peculiar to the human brain. We are drawn to them. Doorways, cave mouths, forest edges, cliff tops, train platforms, old staircases going down into basements that absolutely should have better lighting. A threshold suggests change. It tells us that one kind of space ends and another begins. Jacob's Well is a threshold you can see but not fully read. You can stand in daylight and look into the start of a place where daylight eventually disappears. That's enough to make even a calm person quiet for a moment. The walk to the well is part of the experience too. Hayes County notes that the main trail to Jacob's Well is about 1/4 of a mile, with compacted granite for much of the route and a portion of limestone bedrock. The natural area also offers hiking trails and other low-impact activities, while swimming has not been permitted since June 2022 because of low water levels and unsafe water conditions. That current closure adds another layer to the place. Many people know Jacob's Well from photographs taken when the water was higher and swimming was allowed. They picture the bright, full spring, visitors gathered nearby, swimmers entering the water, the blue opening beneath them. But the present story is more complicated. Drought has affected the spring. The flow has weakened. The famous swimming hole has not been open for swimming for years. A place once known for clear water and summer relief now also carries the visible signs of water stress. There is something sobering about that. The portal image, the deep blue entrance, the inviting surface, all of it depends on the health of the aquifer below. The beauty people came to see was never just sitting there independently like a statue. It was being fed, it was being renewed, it was connected to rainfall, recharge, groundwater use, and the slow movement of water through the hill country's limestone. A spring looks like a single point on the landscape, but it is really an outcome. It is what the underground system is doing at that moment. That means Jacob's Well does not only ask us to think about diving danger, it asks us to think about water itself, where it comes from, how it moves, how quickly people assume it will always be there. Groundwater is easy to forget because most of it is out of sight. Rivers can be watched, lakes can be measured by the shoreline, rain can be heard on the roof. But aquifers work in the dark, below roads, houses, routes, fields and parking lots. We notice them most when springs weaken, wells run low, or creeks stop flowing. The invisible system becomes visible through absence. At Jacob's Well, that makes the opening feel even more charged. It is not just a hole in water. It is a point where the hidden underground world meets the visible one. Water that has moved through rock finally appears in daylight. For a long time, that rising water helped shape Cypress Creek and supported the life around it. The spring was not only scenic, it was functional. It was part of the area's living plumbing, though a much prettier version than the plumbing under a sink, which rarely inspires anyone to write travel articles unless something has gone very wrong. The old appeal of Jacob's Well came from a simple human pleasure. Cold, clear water on a hot day. Texas heat is not shy. It arrives with confidence. It fills the afternoon. It makes shade feel like a public service. In that setting, a spring like Jacob's Well would naturally become beloved. Cold spring water is not just pretty. It is relief. It changes the body's mood. It tells tired skin, dusty shoes, and overheated thoughts that there is another temperature available. No wonder people came. But even in that ordinary pleasure, the well remained unusual. Most swimming places let you look across them. Jacob's Well asks you to look into it. It turns swimming from a horizontal experience into a vertical one. People float above a hole that continues down into the earth. That is not the same as wading in a creek or splashing in a pool. Even when swimmers stayed near the surface, the idea of the depth below them was part of the experience. Some people loved that. Some people found it thrilling. Some people looked once and decided dry land had many underrated qualities. There is no shame in that. A healthy respect for deep water is not cowardice. It is an ancient form of intelligence. The body understands, sometimes before the mind finishes explaining, that water is not our natural place. We can enjoy it, cross it, swim in it, study it, and even dive into it with training. But we do not breathe it. That one small fact changes everything. On land, fear often gives you choices. Step back, sit down, run, call someone. In water, especially overhead water inside a cave, choices narrow quickly. A beautiful environment can become a problem measured in breaths. That is why Jacob's Well unsettles people even in photographs. The image is not simply, here is a pretty spring. It is, here is a pretty spring with a dark hole in the middle. The darkness matters. It creates contrast. Your eye goes to it. You wonder how deep it is. You wonder what is inside. You wonder whether the darkness is empty or full. You wonder how far a person could go. You wonder how anyone would turn around. Then, if you are sensible, you wonder what snacks are available back at the car and whether the rest of the visit can continue entirely above sea level. The portal feeling is also strengthened by the shape of the limestone. The Texas hill country is full of karst features, landscapes formed where water dissolves soluble rock such as limestone over long periods. This kind of geology can create caves, springs, sinkholes, and underground drainage systems. Jacob's Well belongs to that wider setting. It is not a random puncture in the earth. It is part of a landscape shaped by water moving through stone. That slow process is difficult to picture because it happens on a timescale much larger than a human afternoon. Water finds cracks. Carbon dioxide makes rainwater slightly acidic. The water seeps into limestone. Tiny openings become larger. Channels form. Flow increases. More rock dissolves. Over long periods, the underground pathways become caves and conduits. Eventually, in the right place, water emerges as a spring. To us, the well appears as a finished thing. To the earth, if the earth may be allowed a very practical expression, it is ongoing maintenance. The quietness of that process is striking. No single dramatic event carved the whole system in one convenient moment. There was no grand announcement. No ribbon-cutting ceremony for limestone dissolution, though one imagines the speeches would have been extremely damp. Instead, the cave formed slowly through chemistry, pressure, flow, time, and weakness in the rock. The beauty visible today is the surface result of countless small underground changes. That is one reason the place feels older than its human stories. The accidents, the visitors, the photographs, the warnings, the park rules, all of those are recent compared with the making of the cave, and yet humans arrive with our very human sense of urgency. We want to see it now, swim now, dive now, photograph now, understand now. The well does not operate on that schedule. It was made slowly, and it demands patience if we are to understand it safely. Even standing at the surface, the best way to approach Jacob's Well is not with excitement first, but with attention. Attention changes the place. Look at the water, not just the dark opening, but the surface movement, the edges, the rock, the plants nearby, the way the land dips toward the spring, the fact that a small visible pool is connected to a much larger system, the fact that the water you see has passed through an underground route you cannot follow with your eyes. The fact that beauty here is not decoration, it is evidence. Evidence of flow, geology, aquifer pressure, erosion, and living dependence downstream. That makes the portal image less supernatural and more interesting. Jacob's Well is not a magic doorway. It is a real doorway into real geology. It is a place where the hidden structure of the land becomes briefly visible. Most of the time, the underground world keeps its secrets well. We walk over it without thinking. We build on it. We drive across it. We complain about traffic above it, which is one of humanity's great talents. Then, at a spring like Jacob's Well, the underground system opens just enough to remind us that the surface is not the whole story. That reminder can be calming or unsettling depending on your mood. On a peaceful day, it feels wonderful to know the world is layered. It gives a simple landscape depth. It says there is more here than grass, rock and water. But on another day, especially when you think of the cave passages below, it can make the ground feel less certain. The earth is not solid in the way we casually imagine. It has spaces, it has channels, it has hidden rooms filled with water, it has places where a person can enter but not easily return. This is why the first impression of Jacob's Well matters so much. It is where misunderstanding can begin. A person sees a spring and thinks of swimming. They see clear water and think of safety. They see others nearby and think of permission. They see a hole and think of adventure. None of those thoughts are strange. They are ordinary human responses. But Jacob's Well punishes ordinary thinking if ordinary thinking carries someone too far. The place requires a second thought, then a third, then perhaps a fourth thought that says, actually, I am going to admire this with both feet safely placed where feet were designed to be. There is also an emotional reason the portal idea lingers. Deep openings make us aware of scale. Not the scale of mountains or oceans, but the scale of what we do not know. A hole in water is small enough to stand beside, but it points to something beyond easy knowledge. That combination is powerful. It is intimate and huge at once. You can be close to it. You can lean over it. You can photograph it. But you cannot understand the whole of it by looking. It resists quick explanation. The surface gives an image. The cave gives a system. And that system is not friendly to casual entry. The well's mapped cave passages, the depth, the cold water, the overhead environment, and the history of fatal accidents all turn the pretty surface into a serious place. Hays County states that cave divers with the Jacob's Well Exploration Project have mapped over 6,000 feet of underwater passage, and that the maximum depth reaches 137 feet. County rules prohibit scuba diving at the natural area, but standing at the edge before those details settle in, you can understand why people once wanted to enter. The place gives a clean visual invitation, a bright surface, a dark centre, a hot day, a name that sounds old and biblical, a setting that feels peaceful. The entrance looks less like a warning than a question. What is down there? That question has a long history in human beings. It has sent us into caves, across oceans, up mountains, under ice, into deserts, and eventually into space, where we discovered that even the vacuum of the cosmos cannot stop people from misplacing tools. Curiosity is one of our finest traits. It is also one of the reasons warning signs have to be written very clearly. Jacob's Well lives right on that line between curiosity and caution. It rewards looking. It does not reward carelessness. The spring's beauty is not an illusion. The danger is not an exaggeration. They occupy the same place. That is the part worth sitting with for a while. In many stories, we separate beauty and danger as if they belong in different rooms. A lovely place is safe. A dangerous place is harsh. But the natural world does not follow that arrangement. Clear water can hide a cave. Blue sky can sit above desert heat. Snow can soften the appearance of a mountain while increasing avalanche risk. A still lake can be cold enough to shock the body. A spring can look like a swimming hole and behave like the entrance to a technical dive site. Jacob's Well is one of those places that teaches the lesson without raising its voice. Imagine again standing there, not diving, not even swimming, just standing. You hear ordinary outdoor sounds, a bird maybe, a breeze in the trees. Footsteps on the trail. The small noises of people trying to be quiet because a place feels like it deserves quiet, even if no one has said so. The water holds its shape below you. The opening remains dark. It does not perform. It does not explain. It simply waits as water moves through it, or fails to move through it as strongly as it once did, depending on the condition of the aquifer and the season. In earlier decades, When flow was strong and swimming was common, that same opening would have had a more lively setting. People came for the cold water. Children and adults treated the spring as a summer landmark. Some jumped, some floated, some looked down and felt brave. Some looked down and felt their stomach politely decline the invitation. A swimming hole gathers human memories quickly. First visits, family outings, local pride, small dares, wet towels, sunburns that appear later with perfect timing, snacks that get sandy even when there is no sand. The normal little details of recreation, those memories matter too. A place does not become beloved only because it is visually striking. It becomes beloved because people attach days of their lives to it. Jacob's Well has held those attachments for generations. That makes its current vulnerability more emotional. When swimming closes for years, people do not just lose access to water. They lose a ritual. They lose the idea of returning to something that seemed steady. They lose, for a while at least, a piece of local continuity. The well, then, is a portal in more than one practical sense. It opens into a cave. It opens into the aquifer story. It opens into local memory. It opens into questions about risk, conservation, and how people should behave around fragile natural places. None of that requires fantasy. The real thing is layered enough, and there is comfort in keeping it real. The actual Jacob's Well is more interesting than any exaggerated version. It does not need to be called bottomless. It is not bottomless. It does not need monsters or curses or dramatic legends whispered over campfires by someone who definitely brought a flashlight but forgot batteries. The real danger is enough. The real geology is enough. The real beauty is enough. The real sadness of those who died there is more than enough. When a place is already this compelling, exaggeration only makes it smaller. So the best way to look at Jacob's Well is carefully. The way you might look at a sleeping animal from a respectful distance, not because it is waiting to attack, but because it has its own nature, and your safety depends on understanding that nature. The spring is not a trap in the moral sense. It is not pretending. It shows the entrance plainly. It is humans who add the assumption that visible means manageable. A clear portal is still a portal. That may be the most important first lesson of the well. You do not have to enter a place for it to affect you. You can stand above it and feel curiosity. You can learn from it without testing it. You can admire the surface and respect the cave. You can let the question remain unanswered by your own body. Someone else, properly trained and properly equipped, may study the passages. You, dear listener, may remain dry, warm, and comfortable, which is an underrated survival strategy and pairs nicely with tea. And as we stay at the edge a little longer, the spring begins to shift from a pretty opening into a fuller scene. The trees, the rocks, the water, the aquifer below, the creek beyond, the people who came before, the drought that has changed it, the rules that now protect it, and the dark entrance that once tempted divers deeper than they should have gone. All of it gathers around that small circle of water. From a distance, it is a beautiful place. From the edge, it is a question. From beneath the surface, it becomes something else entirely, and the quiet beauty surrounding it is where that deeper story begins to take shape. The quiet beauty of Jacob's Well begins with the ordinary details around it, not the cave, not the deaths, not the warning stories that tend to arrive later with a serious look and a lowered voice. It begins with limestone underfoot, trees around the creek, warm air, clear water, and the kind of stillness that makes people speak a little softer without anyone asking them to. The place does not feel dramatic at first. It feels like a natural spring in the Texas Hill Country, which is exactly what it is. Jacob's Well is an artesian spring in Wimberley, Texas, fed by the Trinity Aquifer, and it forms the headwaters of Cypress Creek before that water continues through the local watershed toward the Blanco River. The spring sits inside Jacob's Well Natural Area, an 81-acre public open space established to protect the sensitive environment above and below the ground. That is the practical description. It is correct, useful, and not nearly enough to explain why people stop when they see it. A map can place Jacob's Well in Hayes County. A park page can list the rules. A sign can tell visitors where to walk and what not to do. But none of that fully captures the first moment of looking down into clear spring water and realizing that the dark round opening below is not just a shadow. It is the entrance to something much larger. A person can know in a calm, factual way that the underwater cave system has been mapped for more than 6,000 feet and reaches a maximum depth of about 137 feet. They can know that scuba diving is not allowed there today. They can know that swimming has been cancelled for the foreseeable future because of low water levels. And still, when they stand near it, the first reaction may be very simple. It is beautiful. Not beautiful in a polished, arranged way. Jacob's Well does not look like it was made for postcards, even though it has ended up in many of them, or at least in the modern version of postcards, which is someone's phone held over the water while everyone nearby hopes they do not drop it. The beauty is in the plain, natural arrangement. Pale limestone, blue-green water, a circular opening, small ripples, sunlight touching the shallows, trees leaning close enough to give shade but not so much that they hide the water. It is a quiet scene, and that quietness matters. If the place looked violent, if water rushed upward in a foaming burst, if the rock edges were jagged and hostile, if the whole setting announced itself like a disaster movie trailer, the human response would be easier. We would admire it from a distance and move on. Perhaps we would take a picture, say, "Goodness, that looks unsafe," and return to the car with the satisfaction of having made one wise decision before lunch. But Jacob's Well is not frightening that way. It looks calm. That calmness is the part that stays with people. Water can be dangerous when it is loud, but quiet water is more confusing. Loud water tells you it has power. A rapid, a flood, a storm surge, a wave breaking against rocks. All of those give the body information quickly. You do not need a lecture on hydrology when a river is throwing branches downstream like toothpicks. Jacob's Well gives a different kind of information. It shows clarity. It shows stillness. It shows shape. It lets you see into it. It gives the impression that because the surface is visible, the situation is understandable. That impression is not the same as safety. Still, it is easy to understand why the place became beloved. The Texas Hill Country can be hot in a way that makes cold water feel less like recreation and more like an answer to a personal problem. On a summer day, clear spring water has a strong argument. It does not have to make speeches. It simply sits there at a steady, cool temperature, and the human body, which has been quietly overheating since breakfast, takes notice. The Jacob's Well exploration project describes the spring's water as clear and about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, rising from the Trinity Aquifer into Cypress Creek. For people used to bright sun and warm air, that kind of water feels like relief before anyone even steps in. A cold spring also has a different character from a swimming pool. A pool is controlled. It has edges, drains, ladders, signs, maybe a lifeguard chair, and often the faint smell of chlorine and sunscreen. A spring feels older than all of that. It comes from below. It belongs to the land first and to visitors second. You can visit it, but you cannot quite claim it. The water has travelled through rock before appearing in daylight, and that gives the place a seriousness even when people are laughing nearby. It is easy to treat a swimming hole as casual, but Jacob's Well is not only a swimming hole. It is a point where groundwater becomes visible. That idea is simple and important. Most of the aquifer is hidden. It is below roads, houses, roots, fences, fields, and the feet of people who may not think about groundwater until a well runs low or a spring stops flowing. Jacob's Well is one of the places where that hidden system shows itself. The water comes up through the spring and feeds Cypress Creek. In better conditions, Hayes County says the spring typically supplied millions of gallons of water per day for downstream neighbours, supporting activities like drinking water, farming, fishing and swimming. That turns the well from a pretty natural feature into part of a community's water story. And water stories are rarely as simple as they look. For many visitors, especially those who knew the well when swimming was open, the place may carry memories of family outings, hot afternoons, wet hair, towels thrown over shoulders, and that small shock of cold water after stepping in from the heat. There is nothing sinister about that. People come to water because water makes life easier and more pleasant. It cools the body. It gives children something to remember. It gives adults a reason to stop looking at their phones for at least several seconds, which in our time may qualify as a minor wellness retreat. A beautiful spring gathers these ordinary human memories. They become part of how a place is loved. Jacob's Well has been loved that way, but it has also been watched, measured, closed, studied, protected and worried over. Its beauty is not separate from its vulnerability. Hayes County suspended the 2024 summer swimming season because of below-average spring flow and water levels, and the county noted that swimming had already been suspended since June 2022, after recorded spring flow dropped below average and later reached zero flow in October of that year. Officials connected the low flow to multi-year drought and increased demand on the Trinity Aquifer. That fact changes the mood of the place, even in memory. The famous image of Jacob's Well as a clear, inviting swimming hole belongs partly to a version of the spring with more water and stronger flow. The current reality is more fragile. A spring that once seemed dependable has shown that it can weaken. The quiet beauty is still there, but it is no longer only the beauty of clear water and limestone. It is also the beauty of something that needs care. That kind of beauty can be harder to look at because it asks more of us. A pretty place asks for admiration. A threatened place asks for restraint. Restraint is not always exciting, which may be why it rarely gets its own action sequence, but it matters. At Jacob's Well, restraint means understanding that the spring is part of a larger system. It means recognizing that drought, groundwater pumping, development, rainfall, recharge and conservation are not side details. They are the conditions that determine whether the well flows strongly, weakly, or not at all. The Watershed Association describes Jacob's Well as a karst spring from the Middle Trinity Aquifer and notes that both drought cycles and groundwater pumping influence the spring's flow. A person looking at the spring from the edge may not see all of that. They see water, they see rock, they see the dark entrance. But beneath the visual scene is an entire underground relationship between geology and human use. That is one reason Jacob's Well is such a strong place for slow attention. If you look quickly, you see a beautiful hole in the water. If you look longer, you see a spring connected to a creek. Longer still, you see an aquifer, then a region, then a community, then a question about how people live with limited water in a place where the heat can make water feel endless simply because everyone wants it to be. This is where the quietness becomes important again. Jacob's Well does not explain itself loudly. It does not give a full lesson at the edge. There is no voice rising from the water saying, please consider aquifer recharge, responsible land management, and the technical hazards of overhead cave environments, though one can imagine that voice being quite useful, if a little unsettling during a picnic. Instead, the place offers signs that people must learn to read. The water level, the clarity, the flow, the rules posted by the park, the absence of swimming where swimming once happened, the protected land around the spring, the fact that the cave remains below even when the surface looks peaceful. The beauty of Jacob's Well is partly in this layered meaning. The spring is scenic, yes, but it is not merely scenery. It is a visible opening into limestone geology, a water source for Cypress Creek, a local landmark, a conservation concern, and the entrance to an underwater cave system that has taken lives. It is a place where different kinds of knowledge overlap. Geology, ecology, history, recreation, danger, memory, and grief all meet in one small pool. That is a lot for a circle of water to carry, and yet it carries it without changing expression. This may be why it feels so quiet. The well does not rush to tell its own story. People do that around it. Visitors describe what they saw. Divers describe the cave. Families remember old summers. County officials describe flow rates and closures. Conservationists describe water stress. The well remains itself, a spring in limestone, influenced by natural forces and human choices. There is something grounding about that. The place is not trying to be dramatic. It is not performing danger. It is not performing beauty either. It simply exists, and human beings keep discovering that existence is complicated. When the water is clear, the entrance looks especially clean. That is one of the strongest visual features of Jacob's Well. The dark shaft does not appear as a messy crack or a random gap. It appears like a defined opening. That can make the place feel almost designed, as if someone cut a doorway into the bedrock and filled it with blue glass. Of course, the shape was made by natural processes. Water moving through limestone over long periods can dissolve rock, widen fractures, and create conduits, caves, and springs. Karst landscapes are full of these features. They are shaped slowly, not by a single dramatic event, but by countless small interactions between water and stone. There is comfort in knowing the real process. It removes the need for myth, but not the sense of wonder. In fact, the real process is better than myth in many ways because it includes patience. Water did not need to hurry. Limestone did not need to hurry. The land did not need to finish on a schedule, submit paperwork, or ask whether visitors would prefer a more convenient handrail. The system formed through pressure, chemistry, flow, and time. Humans arrived much later with cameras, towels, dive gear, rules, and opinions, because that is what humans bring to almost everything. The quiet beauty of Jacob's Well comes from that meeting between old natural process and short human attention. We stand at the edge for a few minutes, maybe an hour, maybe longer if we are researchers, divers or park staff. But the spring belongs to a time scale that makes our visits brief. That does not make the visits meaningless. It may make them more valuable. A person who stands at the well for 10 minutes is witnessing the visible part of a system that took far longer than a human lifetime to shape. That is worth slowing down for. It is also worth noticing how small the surface opening can feel compared with the story attached to it. A place does not need to be large to be powerful. Some landscapes impress through size. Mountains, oceans, deserts, glaciers, all of them make the human body feel small immediately. Jacob's Well works differently. It is not huge at the surface. Its power is concentrated. It draws attention to one point. The darkness under the water gives the small opening a larger mental size. Your eye sees the circle. Your mind sees the unseen continuation. That is why people call it a portal, even when they know it is a spring. The word fits the feeling, not the physics. But the physics matters more. A portal in a story often promises adventure. A submerged cave entrance promises conditions, cold water, depth, rock overhead, possible silt, narrow passages, limited air supply, loss of daylight, the need to return by the same route. These facts do not make the spring less beautiful. They make its beauty more serious. It is beautiful in the way a cliff edge can be beautiful, or a canyon can be beautiful, or a winter mountain can be beautiful. The view is real. The risk is also real. You do not have to choose between them. You only have to avoid confusing one for the other. That confusion is easy because the setting around Jacob's Well is gentle. Trees do not look like warnings. Limestone ledges in sunlight do not look like warnings. Clear water on a hot day certainly does not look like a warning. The scene encourages comfort. It lowers the guard. It says, rest here. And for many purposes, that is fine. Walking the trails, looking at the spring, learning about the area, appreciating the water source, Those are good ways to be with the place. The danger comes when comfort becomes overconfidence. Overconfidence is not usually loud at first. It begins quietly. A person says, "I'll just look." Then, "I'll just swim over it." Then, "I'll just go a little lower." Then for a diver, "I'll just go a little farther." That phrase, "a little farther," has caused trouble in many environments. Caves, mountains, deserts, oceans, even online comment sections, though the hazards there are mostly emotional and involve someone named Mike typing in all capital letters. In a cave, a little farther can change the entire situation. The entrance behind you becomes less visible. The way out becomes less obvious. The amount of air remaining becomes more important. The environment stops being a place to admire and becomes a problem to solve. At the surface, none of that is obvious enough. That is part of the tragedy of Jacob's Well. People can be drawn in by beauty before they understand the conditions below. Trained cave divers approach underwater caves with rules and discipline because they know beauty does not protect them. The cave does not become safer because the entrance is pretty. The water does not become breathable because it is clear. The route out does not become simple because the first few feet look manageable. This is the difference between admiring a place and assuming you are ready to enter it. A good way to respect Jacob's Well is to let its beauty remain at the surface. That may sound disappointing at first. We live in a culture that often treats experience as something that must be pushed to the most intense version. Seeing is not enough. We must enter. Entering is not enough. We must go deeper. Going deeper is not enough. We must record it, post it, and choose a caption that says something like, "No fear," which is often a reliable sign that fear had several valid points but was ignored. Jacob's Well suggests a different relationship. Look closely. Learn. Stay humble. Do not mistake access for entitlement. The protected natural area around the spring helps frame that relationship. The land is not only there to give visitors a path to the water, it acts as a buffer for a sensitive site. Hayes County says Jacob's Well Natural Area was established in 2010 and that its mission is to preserve and protect the environmentally sensitive area above and below ground for future generations. That phrase, above and below ground, is important. Many parks protect what visitors can see: trails, trees, wildlife, views. Jacob's Well requires attention to what visitors cannot see as well. The cave, the aquifer, the flow paths, the water quality, the biological life connected to the spring. The quiet beauty at the surface depends on hidden conditions. If those conditions fail, the image changes. The clear spring becomes shallow. The flow weakens, swimming closes. The famous scene becomes a warning about overuse and drought rather than only a place to cool off. There is a sadness in that, but not a hopeless one. Protection begins with knowing what is there. Many people first learn about Jacob's Well because of its beauty or because of the frightening stories of divers who died there. Either way, attention can lead to care. A person who comes for a dramatic image may leave with a better understanding of groundwater. A person who comes for the danger story may learn about the Trinity Aquifer. A person who comes to see a pretty natural pool may discover that natural places are not guaranteed to remain the same simply because people love them. Love by itself does not protect a spring. Rules help. Conservation helps. Water management helps. Public education helps. Respect helps. Sometimes staying out helps. That last one is not glamorous, but it may be one of the most useful things humans can do. Not every place has to be entered. Not every beautiful thing has to be touched. Not every clear pool has to become a swimming spot every year regardless of conditions. A place can be loved from the edge. This is especially true when the edge already offers so much. Standing at Jacob's Well, you can observe the contrast between shallow and deep water. You can see how the limestone shapes the pool. You can notice how the surrounding plants gather where water has supported life. You can think about the water's underground route. You can imagine Cypress Creek beginning here, carrying the spring's influence away from the opening and into the wider landscape. You can think of all the people who saw the same spring in different years under different conditions with different expectations. Some saw a swimming hole, some saw a cave entrance, some saw a research site, some saw a water source, some saw a place to protect, some sadly saw it as a challenge. The well did not change itself to match any one of those views. That is another quiet lesson. A natural place can hold many meanings at once, but it does not become safer because of the meaning we choose. If someone sees Jacob's Well as a peaceful pool, the cave still exists. If someone sees it as an adventure, the aquifer still has limits. If someone sees it as a local treasure, drought can still lower the water. Reality does not bend to the most comfortable interpretation, which is inconvenient but generally good information. And perhaps that is why the beauty of Jacob's Well feels different after you know more about it. At first, the beauty is visual. Clear water, blue depth, limestone edge. Afterward, the beauty becomes more complicated. You see the spring as part of a system. You see the danger without needing to sensationalize it. You see the vulnerability without turning the place into a lecture. You understand that the calm surface is not false, it is simply incomplete. The well is peaceful at the top and unforgiving below. It is cherished and restricted. It is scenic and stressed. It is small in appearance and large in consequence. That is a more honest beauty than the postcard version. A postcard freezes the place in one pleasing moment. Real places change. They dry, recover, close, reopen, erode, heal, and sometimes fail. They carry histories that do not fit neatly into a single image. Jacob's Well has the kind of beauty that becomes deeper when the difficult parts are not removed. The deaths are part of the caution. The cave is part of the geology. The closures are part of the conservation story. The spring's reduced flow is part of the present reality. The old swimming memories are part of the human story. All of these belong to the same place. So when we speak of the quiet beauty of Jacob's Well, we are not describing a harmless scene. We are describing a place that asks to be seen carefully. It is quiet because the danger is not always visible. It is beautiful because the water and stone form something rare. It is important because the spring connects to a wider watershed. It is fragile because groundwater is not endless. It is memorable because the dark opening under clear water stays in the mind. A person might stand there for only a few minutes and carry the image for years. The round pool, the cold water, the pale rock, the shadow below. The sense that the earth has opened just enough to show that there is more underneath. And once that sense settles in, the next question becomes harder to avoid. How did water make a place like this? How did a clear spring in limestone become a long, flooded maze beneath the surface? The answer begins slowly with rain, rock, pressure and time, and with the patient work of water finding every weakness it can. The answer begins slowly with rain, rock, pressure and time, and with the patient work of water finding every weakness it can. Long before Jacob's Well had a name, long before anyone stood at the edge and wondered whether the dark opening was safe, long before swimmers, divers, park rules, photographs, warning signs, and local stories, there was limestone. That may not sound like the most dramatic beginning, but limestone has a quiet talent for becoming interesting if you give it enough time. It is not flashy. It does not stride into a room and announce, "I shall now create a dangerous underwater cave." It simply waits underground while water does the slow work. And water, as gentle as it looks in a glass beside your bed, is one of the most persistent forces on Earth. The Texas Hill Country is a landscape where water and limestone have been negotiating for a very long time. The area sits in central Texas and is known for rolling hills, springs, canyons, caves, and clear streams, many of them shaped by the way water moves through soluble rock. Texas Parks and Wildlife describes the hill country as part of the Edwards Plateau region. where limestone has been eroded over millions of years into hilly terrain, with springs and steep canyons as part of the landscape. It also notes that limestone in the region contains holes and caves where water can move, and that water reaches the surface as springs through cracks in the rock. That is the larger setting Jacob's Well belongs to. It is not just a pretty hole in a creek bed, it is part of a karst landscape. Karst is the name geologists use for terrain formed when water dissolves bedrock such as limestone, gypsum or marble, creating features like caves, sinkholes, underground streams and springs. The National Park Service explains that karst landscapes form when water enters the ground through cracks and fractures, dissolves the bedrock, travels underground, sometimes for long distances, and later emerges through springs, many of which are cave entrances. So in plain terms, Jacob's Well is not a strange accident. It is a visible piece of a much larger underground pattern. Water falls from the sky. Some of it runs across the surface, some of it sinks into the ground. As it moves through soil, it can mix with carbon dioxide from air and decaying plants, forming a weak carbonic acid. That sounds more alarming than it is. We're not talking about a dramatic bubbling potion in a laboratory with a scientist shouting, "Stand back!" We're talking about ordinary rainwater becoming just acidic enough to dissolve tiny amounts of limestone over time. The National Park Service describes this cave-making process clearly. Precipitation mixes with carbon dioxide, forms carbonic acid, seeps through cracks, reaches carbonate rocks such as limestone or dolomite, and dissolves the rock to create rooms and passageways. A single drop does not do much. One rainy afternoon does not carve a cave. A wet season does not open a mile of passage. But water does not need to win quickly. It is patient in a way humans rarely are. We become irritated when a kettle takes 3 minutes to boil. Water can spend thousands of years widening a crack by fractions, and it does not complain once. It slips into small weaknesses in the rock, carries dissolved minerals away, returns again, and repeats the process. A fracture becomes a narrow route becomes a channel becomes a conduit. Given enough time, flow begins to prefer certain paths, and those paths grow larger because more water uses them. It is a quiet feedback loop. The more water finds a way through, the more that way opens, and the more it opens, the more water can pass. This is one reason caves are so often irregular. They are not carved like hallways by someone with a plan and a measuring tape. They follow weakness, pressure, chemistry, and flow. The rock gives water certain options, and water chooses among them according to gravity and hydraulic pressure, which is a fancy way of saying that water moves where it can, when it can, with far more determination than it looks like it should have. This is also why underground cave systems can feel confusing when mapped. They may branch, narrow, widen, drop, rise, twist, or end abruptly. They are not designed for human comfort. No one considered whether a diver with tanks would appreciate a little extra shoulder room. The limestone was not taking suggestions. Jacob's Well is fed by the Trinity Aquifer, and Hayes County describes the spring as an artesian spring that flows from that aquifer and forms the headwaters of Cypress Creek in Wimberley. The county also states that cave divers with the Jacob's Well Exploration Project have mapped more than 6,000 feet of underwater passage, with a maximum depth of 137 feet. That number is worth letting settle for a moment. From above, a visitor sees a small pool and a dark opening. Below, the cave continues for more than a mile of mapped underwater passage. The visible entrance is only the first word in a very long sentence written in limestone. The Trinity Aquifer itself is not a single simple tank underground, even though that is how we sometimes imagine aquifers. It is not a giant hidden swimming pool with a tidy tile floor and a sign that says Deep End. The Texas Water Development Board describes the Trinity Aquifer as a major aquifer extending across much of central and northeastern Texas, composed of several smaller aquifers within the Trinity Group, with rocks including limestones, sands, clays, gravels and conglomerates. In central Texas, its combined freshwater saturated thickness averages about 1,900 feet. That means the water feeding Jacob's Well is part of a complex underground system. It moves through layers, openings, fractures and conduits, shaped by the structure of the rock and by the pressure of groundwater. When conditions allow, the water rises at Jacob's Well and enters Cypress Creek. That rising water is what made the spring famous, but the spring is only the place where the hidden system becomes visible. The real story is underground, and underground Jacob's Well becomes a maze. The Jacob's Well Exploration Project describes the underwater cave system as having a principal conduit called a tunnel, which trends northwest from the spring opening and extends about 4,500 feet from the surface. It also describes a smaller B-tunnel, branching from the main passage and extending about 1,500 feet northward, with the deepest point of the system, 137 feet, occurring in the first deep section of a tunnel. This is important because it shows that Jacob's Well is not simply a vertical shaft dropping straight down like a chimney. The opening begins the descent, but the cave then becomes a system of passages. It has direction, it has branches, it has sections, it has restrictions, it has places where the route is not obvious to anyone who is not trained to read and navigate such spaces. This is where the word maze becomes more than decoration. A maze is not dangerous only because it has turns. It is dangerous because it interferes with certainty. A person entering an unfamiliar maze may think they will remember the route. Left, right, straight, turn at the funny-shaped rock and back again. That sounds simple until stress arrives. In a dry maze, you can stop, breathe, sit down, and admit you've made an unfortunate navigational choice. In an underwater cave, stopping does not remove the problem. Breathing depends on equipment. Visibility can change. The way out is not above you. The rock overhead does not care how badly you would like a shortcut. The cave beneath Jacob's Well was not carved to be entered. It was carved to move water. That difference matters. A water conduit can be perfectly successful from a geological point of view and completely inconvenient from a human point of view. Narrow sections may move water just fine. Low ceilings may not bother water at all. Silted floors do not trouble water because water has no knees, no fins, no tank valves, and no tendency to panic after realizing it turned into the wrong passage. What is efficient for flow can be hazardous for a diver. The hidden maze also has a way of making the surface feel deceptive after the fact. From above, Jacob's Well looks like one feature. Underwater, it becomes many. The entrance drops down, then the passage angles, extends and separates into sections. Some parts are deeper, some shallower, some tighter, and some more likely to hold silt. Hays County notes that the submerged cave system has 15-inch restrictions, false exits, silty floors, no air, and no light source, all of which make it an extremely difficult dive. These are not dramatic extras added for effect. They are exactly the kinds of features that turn a beautiful spring into a deadly environment for anyone who treats it casually. A 15-inch restriction is not just narrow, it is personal. It means the cave can squeeze a diver into a position where equipment, body position, breathing control and calm judgment all matter at once. On land, 15 inches might be the gap behind a sofa where the remote control goes to retire forever. Underwater, inside a cave with tanks and gear, it becomes a serious physical challenge. If a diver has to remove equipment to pass, or twist carefully, or avoid stirring the floor, the margin for error becomes much smaller. A small mistake can change visibility. A fin stroke can lift silt. A bumped wall can disorient. A tight place can turn confidence into anxiety very quickly. Silt is especially important in underwater caves. A cave floor may hold fine sediment that has settled there over time. It can look harmless when undisturbed. Then, a diver's fins, hands, bubbles, or movement can stir it into the water, creating a sudden cloud. In open water, poor visibility is unpleasant. In a cave, it can be life-threatening. A diver may no longer see the passage, the guideline, a partner, or even their own instruments clearly. The cave that seemed readable becomes a blank brown or grey room. The way out still exists, but the eyes cannot find it easily. That is one of the reasons cave diving training places so much emphasis on guideline use, finning technique, gas planning, and staying calm. The cave is not only a place, it is a set of conditions that can change because you entered it. The formation of Jacob's Well also explains why false exits can exist. In a branching cave system, a diver may encounter passages, side pockets, upward openings, or spaces that appear promising, especially under stress. A false exit is not a doorway marked wrong way, because caves are famously poor at signage. It may simply look like a route. In low visibility, with air running down and the mind becoming less patient, even a trained person can face serious difficulty. For an untrained or underprepared diver, the cave's geometry becomes a trap not because it moves, but because the diver's understanding of it fails. All of this comes from the same basic process that made the spring beautiful. Water carved the space. Water widened cracks. Water created conduits. Water fed the pool. Water polished the scene. The same force that made Jacob's Well inviting also made it complex below. That is one of the harder truths about natural places. The thing that creates beauty can also create danger. The cliff exists because erosion worked. The canyon exists because water cut down through rock. The cave exists because water found a way through the limestone. The result can be stunning, but it was not made for us. If we were to follow the story of a single drop of rain, in imagination rather than in actual fieldwork, because a drop of rain is a difficult interview subject, it might fall on the hill country and sink into soil. There, it picks up carbon dioxide and becomes slightly acidic. It slips into a crack in limestone. At first, the crack is tiny. The water dissolves a little rock, carries dissolved minerals away, and keeps moving if pressure and gravity allow it. More water follows. Over a long period, the opening grows. Flow becomes more concentrated. The path becomes easier for future water. Eventually, the underground route becomes large enough to move serious amounts of groundwater. In the right place, that water rises, enters daylight, and we call it a spring. That is the broad idea, but Jacob's Well has its own particular shape because every cave system is shaped by local conditions. The type of limestone, the fractures already present, the slope of the land, the pressure in the aquifer, changes in water table, rainfall patterns, drought, and time all influence the result. The cave is not a generic tunnel. It is the physical record of how water solved the problem of moving through that specific rock. And like many solutions made by nature, it works very well for nature, and only sometimes for people. There is a temptation to picture the cave as empty space under the ground, but that is not quite right. It is full of water. That makes it different from a dry cave where air fills chambers and people can walk, crawl, or sit down with a sandwich if they planned poorly but optimistically. In a fully submerged cave, the water occupies the space completely. A diver is not moving through air into water. They're entering water that is already inside the earth. That creates the overhead environment, meaning there is rock between the diver and the open air. The surface is no longer directly reachable. This single fact changes the whole activity. Jacob's Well's mapped status also tells a story about careful exploration. Hays County says that by 2004, teams were surveying and mapping the submerged cave system, and in 2007, the Jacob's Well Exploration Project was formally created as a coalition of volunteer, self-funded cave divers conducting exploration and research. The county says the project has surveyed and mapped currently accessible areas and produced a detailed map documenting approximately 6,000 feet of passage. Mapping an underwater cave is not like walking through a building with a clipboard. It requires training, planning, repeated dives, guideline work, measurements, survey notes, and careful control of risk. Every mapped line represents time spent in an environment that does not forgive casual behaviour. That careful mapping also helps separate reality from rumour. Places like Jacob's Well often attract exaggerated claims because the unknown is very good at wearing a dramatic hat. People may call it bottomless. They may imagine bodies in unreachable places. They may repeat half-remembered stories as if the cave has no known dimensions. But the cave has been studied and mapped by experienced divers. It is not bottomless. Its known maximum depth is about 137 feet, and its mapped passages extend over 6,000 feet. The real facts are serious enough. They do not need decoration. In a sleep story, it may seem odd to spend so much time on geology. But geology is what makes the danger understandable without making it sensational. If we only say Jacob's Well is deadly, the place becomes a scary image. If we understand how water formed it, the danger becomes logical. The cave is narrow because water followed particular fractures. It branches because flow found more than one route. It holds silt because fine sediment settles in quiet underwater spaces. It has no daylight beyond a point because the passage turns away from the entrance. It has no air because it is submerged. It has false exits because natural conduits do not arrange themselves according to human expectations. The deadliness is not a curse, it is structure. And structure is exactly what a diver must understand. The surface gives an easy story. There is a pool, there is a hole, there is water. The underground structure gives a harder one. There is an entrance, there are passages, there are restrictions, there is depth, there is silt. There is no direct ascent. There is a route in, and therefore there must be a route out. That route out must remain known, visible, and reachable. This is why cave divers treat lines and gas planning with such seriousness. The cave's formation created a maze, and the diver's procedures are the way to survive inside that maze. The water that carved Jacob's Well also continues to connect the cave to the living landscape. The spring is not merely a relic of old geology. It is still tied to the condition of the Middle Trinity Aquifer. Hayes County states that Jacob's Well flow responds to short and long-term climate variation, and that groundwater pumping from the Middle Trinity Aquifer directly influences its flow. It also says drought cycles and increased pumping have significantly diminished spring flow in recent years. That means the cave is both ancient and current. It was made over long spans of time, but its visible expression changes with modern drought and human water use. That is an unusual combination. The rock story is slow. The water management story can be fast. A cave may take ages to form, but spring flow can change within seasons, years, or decades. People who remember Jacob's Well as a strong spring may now see it weakened. People who saw old images of clear water may be surprised by closures and low flow. This is another way water carved the hidden maze, not only underground but in public understanding. It has made the place a lesson in both deep time and present responsibility. There is a simple way to hold the whole process in mind. Jacob's Well is the place where underground water has found a route to the surface through limestone. That route was made by dissolution and flow. Over time, it became a cave system. The cave system became scenic at the entrance and dangerous within. The same aquifer that feeds the spring also supports human use in the region. When drought and pumping reduce pressure and supply, the spring weakens. So the well is not only a hole, it is an outlet, a marker, a warning light, and a doorway into geology. A very pretty doorway, which is part of the problem. The hidden maze beneath Jacob's Well is not visible enough to discourage everyone. From the surface, especially in clear water, the first part can look manageable. The entrance may seem like something a strong swimmer can inspect, or something a diver can explore for just a moment. But caves do not become dangerous all at once. They become dangerous by degrees. A few feet farther, one restriction, one turn, one cloud of silt, one moment of uncertainty, one delayed decision to turn back. The formation of the cave creates these stages naturally. water does not make a neat boundary that says, beyond this point the adventure becomes a serious technical operation. The boundary must exist in the person's judgment. That is why understanding the formation matters before understanding the accidents. The people who died at Jacob's Well did not die because the water looked ugly, or because the entrance was obviously hostile. They died in a place formed by natural processes that created an environment beyond ordinary recreational limits. The hidden maze was already there, quiet and indifferent, before any person entered it. Its passages did not need to change for tragedy to happen. A human being only needed to misread them. As the water continues moving through the aquifer in the cave, when conditions allow, it carries with it the long memory of the landscape. Rainfall, limestone, cracks, pressure, drought, human pumping, conservation, and time all meet in the spring. The opening in the creek bed is only the visible mouth of that story. Below it, the maze continues in darkness, shaped not by mystery in the supernatural sense, but by the practical persistence of water working on stone. And once the mind understands that, it becomes easier to see why the next part of the story is so human. A cave like this does not only exist underground, it exists in the imagination. Clear water invites the eye. The dark passage invites curiosity. The mapped tunnels invite experts. The danger invites warnings. The beauty invites people closer than they may have planned to go. Somewhere between the quiet surface and the hidden maze, curiosity begins to lean forward, and that is where the temptation to go deeper starts. The temptation to go deeper begins in a very ordinary way. A person stands near clear water, looks down, and thinks, "I can see it." That is all. Not, "I'm about to do something dangerous." Not, "This place has a long history of accidents." Not, "I should pause and compare my confidence with the exact demands of an overhead cave environment." The first thought is simpler. The water is clear, the opening is visible, the edge is close, the body feels warm from the sun, the spring looks calm, and because it looks calm, the mind starts making quiet little bargains with itself. Just a closer look, just a little farther, just enough to see where it goes. That phrase, "just enough," has a long and troublesome history. It appears in mountains, caves, abandoned buildings, rivers, frozen lakes, and badly assembled flat-pack furniture. It sounds reasonable in the beginning because it does not feel like a commitment. It feels like curiosity with one foot still on the brake. But at Jacob's Well, the problem is that the first part of the place looks much easier than the rest of it. The bright water at the entrance gives a swimmer or diver the feeling that they understand the situation. The cave below does not correct them. It does not wave, blink, shout, or politely hand them a printed risk assessment. It simply waits beneath the surface. Jacob's Well is well known now as an artesian spring fed by the Trinity Aquifer, forming the headwaters of Cypress Creek in Wimberley, Texas. It sits inside an 81-acre natural area, where conservation is the first priority, and Hayes County's rules now state clearly that scuba diving is not allowed. The county also explains that cave divers with the Jacob's Well Exploration Project have mapped more than 6,000 feet of underwater passage, with a maximum depth of 137 feet. Those numbers are important, but they are not what a visitor feels when staring into the water. Numbers are calm. The well is visual. It gives you a picture before it gives you a warning. A person can hear 6,000 feet of passage and still be focused on the first few feet they can see. That is how temptation works. It reduces a large danger into a small next step. Nobody begins by imagining the entire cave system. They imagine the entrance. They imagine themselves staying in control. They imagine turning back whenever they want. And usually in ordinary life, that kind of thinking works well enough. We test things. We peek around corners. We walk a few steps down a trail before deciding whether to continue. We look into a shop window and think we will not buy anything. which is a noble belief until a pastry or a discount sign becomes involved. The human mind is built to explore in increments. We do not usually make one huge decision. We make a series of smaller decisions, each one feeling almost harmless because it is only a little more than the last. That is exactly why a place like Jacob's Well can be so persuasive. The entrance does not seem to demand a full decision. It seems to offer a small one. Swim over the opening, drop down a bit, look into the shaft, go only as far as the light reaches, stay only a moment, turn back before things become serious. To someone on the surface, especially in older years when swimming and diving were more common there, each step may have seemed manageable. The danger was not always in the first moment. It was in the way the place invited people to keep adjusting the line between safe and unsafe. Clear water is part of that invitation. If the well were muddy, people might stay away more easily. Muddy water makes people suspicious. It hides branches, rocks, snakes, old tyres, and possibly the left sandal someone lost in 1998 and still occasionally thinks about. Clear water feels cleaner, kinder, more honest. It lets you see shapes below. It gives the impression that what is visible is what matters. But in Jacob's Well, visibility at the entrance does not mean the whole system is readable. It only means the first part is visible enough to attract attention. The Jacob's Well Exploration Project describes the site as a clear, cold spring that has long attracted swimmers, while also noting that beyond the inviting sunlit water is an extensive underwater cave system. The main passage, called a tunnel, extends about 4,500 feet from the spring opening, while B tunnel branches from the main passage and extends about 1,500 feet. The deepest point in the mapped system is 137 feet. That is a very different place from the one suggested by the surface. A pool says, "Come cool off." A cave system says, "Do you have the training, equipment, permission, plan and discipline required to enter an overhead environment where a direct descent is not possible?" The second message is less charming but much more useful. For many people, the temptation to go deeper is also tied to identity. Nobody likes to think of themselves as reckless. Most people who take risks do not describe themselves that way in the moment. They feel capable, curious, maybe experienced, maybe adventurous. They may have swum in deep water before. They may have dived in other places. They may have held their breath longer than their friends. They may have scuba certification, which is an achievement, but not the same as training for underwater cave systems. This is where danger can disguise itself as competence. A person can have real skill in one environment and still be unprepared for another. That is not an insult. It is simply how specialization works. A person who can drive a car well is not therefore ready to pilot a helicopter. A person who can cook dinner is not therefore ready to run a restaurant kitchen during a Saturday night rush, though they may briefly believe otherwise after making one very successful pasta dish. Open water diving and cave diving are not the same activity with a slightly darker background. They are different disciplines. In open water, the surface is usually above you. In a cave, rock may be above you. In open water, getting lost is not pleasant, but there is often room to ascend. In a cave, the way out is a path, and losing that path is one of the most serious problems a diver can face. Jacob's Well made that distinction painfully clear over time. Hayes County states that at least 8 people lost their lives diving there between 1960 and 1985, and the same county educational page also notes that at least 9 people died scuba diving there from the 1960s through the 1980s. It describes the submerged cave as having 15-inch restrictions, false exits, silty floors, no air, and no light source. Those details show why the temptation is so dangerous. The cave does not only go deeper, it becomes more complex. A narrow restriction is not like the wide entrance. A false exit is not like the surface opening. A silty floor is not like clear water above. A dark passage is not like sunlight shining into the first shaft. The person who enters because the beginning looks manageable may not be prepared for the conditions that appear later, and the later conditions are the ones that matter. There is also a psychological trap in places like this. The first successful step can make the next step feel safer. If someone swims over the well and nothing happens, the brain records that as evidence. If someone dives a little and comes back, that becomes evidence too. If someone else did it before and survived, that becomes more evidence. Even if the situations were not the same, humans collect these small proofs and stack them into confidence. The stack can look sturdy until reality leans on it. Jacob's Well had stories of people going in and coming back. It also had stories of people who did not. The problem is that survival stories can be louder in the mind before an accident, while fatal stories often become clear only afterward. A person standing at the edge does not feel the full weight of everyone who underestimated the cave. They feel the heat of the day, the coolness of the water, and the urge to test themselves a little. That urge can be stronger than a warning sign, especially for young people, strong swimmers, or divers who have not yet been humbled by the specific kind of danger a cave presents. Youth makes the temptation sharper, not because young people are foolish by nature, but because confidence and consequence do not always arrive at the same time. Many people can remember being young enough to believe that turning back would always be easy, that strength could solve most problems, and that fear was mostly something to push through. Later in life, we tend to develop a more respectful relationship with fear, the way one might develop a respectful relationship with a ladder after falling off a smaller ladder, while doing something that definitely did not require standing on the top step. Fear is not always wisdom, but it often carries useful information. At Jacob's Well, fear should not be dismissed too quickly. A nervous feeling at the edge may be the body noticing the difference between clear water and safe water. It may be the mind quietly adding up the facts before pride interrupts. It may be the oldest part of the nervous system saying, "We are land animals, and that is a hole full of water leading under rock, so perhaps tonight we remain decorative." The trouble is that temptation can feel more interesting than caution. Caution rarely makes a thrilling story at first. I looked into Jacob's Well, respected the danger, and went for a walk instead. It is a very good decision, but it does not sound dramatic. I went deeper than I planned. Has more drama, which is exactly the problem. Humans are story-making creatures. We like the idea of a challenge. We like testing edges. We like being able to say we saw something most people did not see. The cave entrance offers that possibility. It says, without words, that there is a hidden world below the ordinary one, and hidden worlds are powerful. A person standing at Jacob's Well can see enough to imagine more. The blue opening suggests continuation. The darkness suggests secrecy. The shape suggests a passage. Every visible part of it says there is something beyond the surface. For a trained researcher or expert cave diver, that may lead to careful survey work, mapping, documentation, and strict procedures. For an untrained visitor, it should lead only to curiosity from a safe distance. But the same visual pull affects both. The difference is what people do with it. That is where humility becomes the most important equipment, long before any physical gear. Humility says, "This place is not easier because I want it to be." It says, "Other people have died here." It says, "A beautiful entrance is still an entrance to an environment I may not understand." It says, "I can admire this without entering it." Humility is not dramatic, and it does not usually get applause, but in dangerous natural places it saves lives. It is the quiet voice that stops a small decision from becoming a final one. There is also the problem of returning. Going deeper is only half of any dive, climb, hike, or exploration. The way back counts just as much, and often more. At the start, a person has energy, attention, and confidence. The route in is new and interesting. The body is fresh. The mind is curious. But the return happens after time has passed, after air has been used, after the environment may have changed, after disorientation or fatigue may have entered the picture. Many dangerous places are easier to enter than to leave. Jacob's Well is one of those places. In a cave, the return is not a casual reversal. It is a task. The diver must know the route, manage breathing gas, maintain orientation, avoid disturbing silt, handle equipment, and remain calm. That is why trained cave divers treat the route back as central from the beginning. The entrance is not just a starting point. It is the only way out unless there is another known exit, and in underwater cave systems, assuming another exit exists is not a plan. It is a wish wearing a little diving mask. For a person pulled by temptation, the way in may feel like exploration, while the way out is assumed. That assumption is dangerous. The cave may look different when turning around. Light may fall differently. A narrow space that was passable one way may feel harder in reverse. Silt may reduce visibility. A person's breathing may quicken. Stress may make time feel strange. Small errors can stack up quickly. The cave does not need to collapse or change shape. It only needs the diver to become uncertain. This is one reason Jacob's Well gained such a grim reputation among divers and locals. It was not just deep, it was deceptive in the way many cave systems are deceptive. It had an accessible entrance, a beautiful surface, and then increasingly difficult conditions below. According to Hays County, recreational scuba diving at Jacob's Well halted after the 1985 drowning deaths of 2 young men, and after a respected local diver nearly lost his own life during a recovery dive. Later exploration by trained cave divers continued in a research context, leading to detailed mapping by the Jacob's Well Exploration Project. That history matters because it shows the difference between curiosity controlled by procedure and curiosity driven by impulse. The cave did not stop being interesting after the accidents. It became more clearly understood as a place that required expert handling. The same passages that tempted recreational divers became passages for trained teams conducting careful exploration. The goal changed from adventure to documentation and protection. That is a major shift. It turns the question from, how far can I go, into, what can be learned safely and what should remain untouched? For the average visitor, the safest answer is simple. Do not go in. That may feel too plain for a place with such a dramatic reputation, but plain truths are often the most useful ones. The well can be admired from outside. Its history can be learned. Its geology can be respected. Its water can be protected. No personal proof is required. A person does not need to enter a dangerous space to understand that it is dangerous. You do not have to put your hand in a blender to appreciate the engineering. And yet, the temptation remains understandable. That is important to admit. If we pretend only foolish people are drawn to dangerous places, we miss the larger lesson. Jacob's Well is tempting because it is beautiful, because it is clear, because it is unusual, because it seems accessible, and because humans are naturally interested in hidden spaces. The danger comes when curiosity outruns understanding. The person who feels the pull is not automatically reckless. The decisive moment is what they do after feeling it. The well invites the eye downward, and the mind follows. It imagines the water cooling the skin. It imagines the view from below. It imagines the dark opening becoming larger as the body descends. It imagines being one of the few who looked deeper. But imagination often edits out discomfort. It does not always include the cold, the pressure, the narrowing, the loss of light, the possibility of silt, the body's need for air, or the sharp change in thinking that can come when confidence breaks. Imagination is a wonderful storyteller, but in dangerous environments it sometimes needs a fact-checker sitting beside it, with a clipboard and no sense of romance. At Jacob's Well, the facts are firm. The cave is extensive. The passages have restrictions and false exits. People have died there. Scuba diving is prohibited at the natural area. The spring itself has been affected by drought and low flow, and swimming has been cancelled for the foreseeable future. These are not decorations around the story, they are the story's guardrails. Still, even guardrails do not remove the human feeling at the edge. A person can know all this and still understand why someone once looked down and wanted to go farther. That is the uneasy honesty of Jacob's Well. It is not a dull hazard. It is not a place people approached because they failed to notice it. They noticed it because it was striking. They came close because it was beautiful. They went deeper because the first part seemed to allow it. The danger began not with ugliness, but with invitation. That is what makes this place so useful as a warning. It reminds us that danger does not always arrive with rough edges. Sometimes it arrives as clear water on a hot day. Sometimes it looks peaceful. Sometimes it offers exactly the kind of beauty that makes a person lower their guard. And sometimes the most dangerous words are not shouted in panic, but whispered calmly in the mind, just a little farther. The surface of Jacob's Well makes that thought easy to understand. The cave beneath makes it dangerous to obey. Between those two facts is the whole human struggle with places like this. We want to know. We want to test ourselves. We want to see what lies beyond the visible edge. But some edges are not meant to be crossed casually, and some beautiful places are better understood from a respectful distance. So we remain, for now, at the point where curiosity begins. The water is clear. The entrance is dark. The first few feet look possible. The deeper passage gives no visible warning from above, and as the mind follows that opening downward, the next part of the story becomes less about temptation and more about what actually happens when clear water stops behaving like comfort and begins behaving like a trap. Clear water is one of the reasons Jacob's Well feels safe at first. It lets the eye relax. It lets the mind believe it has been given enough information. The rock is visible. The entrance is visible. The sunlight reaches down into the first part of the spring. The water looks clean, cold, and honest. If there is danger here, surely it should be hidden in muddy water or crashing waves or some dramatic warning from nature, preferably with a sign that says "absolutely not" in large letters. But clear water has a way of making danger look organised. It turns depth into something you can admire rather than something you have to question. That is where the trouble begins. At Jacob's Well, the clarity is part of the invitation. A swimmer looking down can see the mouth of the spring. A diver entering the water can see enough of the opening to feel that the space is understandable. The first shaft seems direct. The water is cool and clean. The edges of the rock look solid and calm. Nothing in that first impression feels chaotic. It does not look like a place where someone could become confused. It looks like a place where someone could simply go down, look around, and come back up. And for many people near the surface, that may be true. The problem is that the well changes as soon as the person goes from looking at it to entering it, and then changes again as the person goes from entering it to moving farther inside. Water is not our home environment. We can be comfortable in it for a while. We can learn to swim, dive, float, and move through it with skill. But every second in water is still governed by one very basic fact. We need air. This fact is so obvious that it almost sounds silly to say, but in places like Jacob's Well, the simplest facts become the most important ones. On land, you can hesitate. You can stop and think. You can stand still and look around. You can be uncertain for several minutes and nothing especially dramatic happens, unless you are standing in the middle of a supermarket aisle blocking someone who needs pasta, in which case the social pressure may be intense. Underwater, hesitation costs air. Panic costs more air. Confusion costs more air. Cold costs more air. Effort costs more air. The body begins keeping account even if the mind does not. Clear water does not change that account. A person can feel calm at the surface and very different once submerged. The cold of spring water can be a shock even when expected. The body reacts, breathing changes, muscles tighten, the face and chest feel the temperature first. In ordinary swimming, this may be refreshing. In a cave environment, even a small shift in breathing and comfort matters. When people become tense, They use more energy. When they use more energy, they need more air. When they need more air, time becomes shorter. And time underwater is not the soft, flexible time of a quiet evening. It becomes practical. It is measured in pressure gauges, breaths, distance, and the route back. This is one of the ways clear water turns against you, not by becoming suddenly violent, but by letting you underestimate the seriousness of where you are. A person may think, I can see fine. But visibility is not the same as safety. Seeing the entrance is not the same as knowing the cave. Seeing the first passage is not the same as understanding the way out after turning around. Seeing clear water is not the same as having the training to handle what happens when the water stops being clear. And underwater caves can change visibility quickly. Inside a submerged cave, the floor and ledges may hold fine sediment. It can sit there undisturbed for long periods, quiet and harmless looking. A diver passes over it, and a careless fin kick, a hand against the wall, a knee near the floor, or bubbles moving through the passage can stir it up. The clear water begins to cloud. At first it may only look like a little dust, then it thickens. The space that seemed readable becomes dull and grey. The line of sight shortens. Shapes fade. The entrance no longer looks obvious. The rock walls become vague. A diver may not be able to see a hand clearly in front of their face if the silt out is bad enough. That is a very different kind of fear from ordinary darkness. Darkness at least has honesty. If you enter a dark room, you know you cannot see. You move cautiously. You look for a light. Silt is more treacherous because it can arrive after you believed you had visibility. It changes the rules during the dive. One moment, the cave seems open enough to read. The next, the passage becomes a blank space full of suspended particles. The way out still exists, but the eyes may not be able to find it. This is why trained cave divers use guidelines and practice for zero visibility exits. They do not rely on memory or confidence. They assume the cave can take sight away. A casual diver may not think that way. A swimmer holding their breath certainly will not have that kind of preparation. They may rely on what they saw while entering. They may believe they can simply turn and follow the same route back. But memory underwater can be unreliable, especially when fear begins to rise. Passages look different from the other direction. A shadow that was behind you is now ahead. A narrow opening that seemed easy while going in may feel smaller on the way out. A side space may look like the main route. The human brain, under stress, is very good at grabbing the wrong clue and defending it with great confidence. It is the same brain that sometimes loses car keys already sitting in one hand, so we should be cautious about trusting it in a flooded cave. The calm surface of Jacob's well hides these complications. From above, the well looks vertical and simple. Below, the environment becomes three-dimensional in a much more serious way. There is depth, but there is also direction. There are walls, ceiling, floor, restrictions, side passages, and changes in shape. In open water, if a diver becomes uncomfortable, going upward may solve many problems. In a cave, upward can be solid rock. The safest direction is not up. The safest direction is back along the known path to open water. That is not instinctive. The human body in distress wants air, and air usually feels like it should be above. A cave breaks that basic assumption. This is one of the cruelest parts of an overhead environment. The body's emergency instructions are too simple for the place. The body says, go up. The cave says, up is stone. The body says, go toward light. The passage may have no visible light. The body says, move faster. Moving faster can stir silt, waste air, cause equipment problems, and increase panic. The body says, get out now. The cave requires slow, controlled, correct movement. This conflict between instinct and environment is why training matters so much. Training gives a person better instructions than panic does. Without it, the mind may do what feels natural and still make things worse. At Jacob's Well, the water can look gentle while the cave demands technical discipline. This difference is hard to accept because the beginning seems so accessible. There are natural dangers that keep people away by being uncomfortable immediately. A freezing mountain ridge, a violent surf break, a desert without shade, a cliff with loose rock. Jacob's Well begins with beauty. It begins with something the body wants. Cool water, shade, relief, a place to look into, a place to photograph, a place that seems to say, "Come closer." The cave waits below that invitation with a completely different personality. It helps to think of the well as two places occupying the same space. There is the surface Jacob's Well, the one people see in photographs, the clear pool in limestone, the famous natural spring, the quiet landmark. Then there is the underwater Jacob's Well, the cave system with passages and restrictions, where the risk is not based on how pretty the entrance looks, but on physics, geology, equipment, training, and decision-making. The tragedy comes when someone carries the assumptions of the first place into the second. Clear water encourages that mistake because it reduces the feeling of uncertainty. If water is muddy, your mind admits it does not know what is below. Clear water gives you enough detail to think you know more than you do. It feels like a promise, but it is only a view. It shows the first layer. It does not show how the space will feel once your breathing changes. It does not show how quickly air can be used under stress. It does not show how the passage looks after a cloud of silt. It does not show how hard it can be to turn around in a narrow place. It does not show how fear can make a person rush, and rushing can make the cave harder to escape. There is another quiet danger in clear water. It can make distance difficult to judge. Underwater, objects can appear closer or larger than they are, and light behaves differently. A passage may seem more reachable. A wall may seem less confining. Depth may not feel real until pressure, effort, or darkness begins to tell the body otherwise. In a spring like Jacob's Well, the clean water can make the opening look almost invitingly measurable. The mind thinks, "It is right there." Then the body enters, and right there becomes more complicated. As a diver descends, pressure increases. This is normal in diving, but it is not meaningless. Airspaces compress. Equipment must be managed. Breathing gas is used differently at depth. The deeper a diver goes, the faster they consume the gas in the tank, because the air is denser under pressure. Stress can increase that consumption even more. That means a diver who feels calm in open water may use air much faster inside a cave if they are anxious, exerting themselves, or trying to move through a restriction. The cave does not have to be extremely deep for air planning to become serious. It only has to be overhead and difficult enough that getting out takes time, and time, again, becomes less forgiving. A casual observer may imagine that danger appears only when a diver gets lost far inside. But danger can begin earlier than that. It can begin with poor planning. It can begin with entering without a guideline. It can begin with not knowing when to turn around. It can begin with assuming the return will be simple. It can begin with one person following another person who seems confident. It can begin with a light failure, an equipment snag, a change in visibility, or a moment of embarrassment that keeps someone from admitting they are uncomfortable. Human pride is not usually listed as dive equipment, but it has accompanied many people into dangerous places. The well does not care about pride. It does not reward bravery in the casual sense. It rewards preparation, caution, and the willingness to turn back early. That last part may be the hardest for some people. Turning back can feel like failure if the goal is to go deeper. But in cave environments, turning back is not failure. It is often the most intelligent action available. The cave will still be there. The rock has already waited longer than any human schedule. It is not impressed by someone pushing beyond their limit. There is a simple phrase in many dangerous activities. The destination is optional, the return is mandatory. It sounds like something printed on a mug for serious hikers, perhaps next to a drawing of boots and a slightly judgmental mountain goat. But it is true. Going deeper into Jacob's well was always optional. Coming back was not. Every movement into the cave creates a debt that must be repaid with a safe exit. If a person does not have the training, equipment, gas, visibility, and calm to make that exit, then the first movement inward was already too much. Panic changes the body in ways that make all of this worse. Breathing becomes fast and shallow. Fine motor control can suffer. Attention narrows. A person may focus on one thing and miss another. They may forget steps they know. They may fight the water instead of moving through it. In a cave, panic is especially dangerous because the solution often requires doing the opposite of what panic demands. Slow down. Hold the line, check air, communicate, think, move carefully. Do not stir more silt. Do not bolt upward if upward is not an exit. Panic wants speed. Survival may require patience. Jacob's well has no room for dramatic mistakes, but it also has limited room for small ones. That is the unsettling part. Fatal accidents in places like this often do not require one huge foolish act. They can come from a chain of ordinary errors. A person goes a little farther than planned. They use more air than expected. They lose the route. A fin kick stirs silt. Visibility drops. They turn into the wrong space. Panic rises. Air goes faster. Now the situation that began as curiosity becomes a race against the body's most basic need. Clear water at the beginning can make that chain hard to imagine. It gives no preview of the worst version of the cave. It shows the well on a good visual day, in its most attractive mood. That is not dishonesty. Nature is not putting on a disguise. The water is genuinely clear. The spring is genuinely beautiful. The danger is simply not fully visible from the place where people make the first decision. That is why rules and warnings matter. They bring invisible knowledge to the surface. They tell visitors what their eyes cannot. Still, warnings can feel strangely abstract when a place looks peaceful. A sign says, "No diving." A person looks at the water and thinks, "But it looks fine." That little word, fine, can be surprisingly dangerous. Weather looks fine before a storm reaches you. Ice looks fine before it cracks. A trail looks fine before heat exhaustion begins. A cave entrance looks fine before the passage narrows. The eye reports what it sees now. A warning reports what has happened before and what can happen next. The warning is often the more informed witness. In Jacob's well, the history of accidents is part of that witness. The water did not suddenly become dangerous only when someone died. The hazards were always built into the cave. The deaths force people to take those hazards seriously. There is sadness in that because warnings often grow stronger only after loss. A place becomes better understood after it has already taken something that cannot be returned. This is why telling the story carefully matters. Not to make the well seem monstrous, but to make the danger visible before someone stands at the edge and thinks only of beauty. There is also the danger of familiarity. Local places can feel safer because they are known. If people grow up hearing about a swimming hole, visiting it, seeing others visit it, and treating it as part of normal life, the danger can become background noise. A famous local spring becomes familiar in the same way a road becomes familiar, but familiarity is not protection. Many accidents happen in places people know well enough to relax around, but not well enough to respect fully. Jacob's well can be both a beloved local landmark and a serious hazard. Those two truths can sit together, even if they make the story more uncomfortable. A person may wonder why anyone would enter after hearing of the danger, but that question is easier to ask from a safe distance. At the edge, the well works on the senses first. The sun is warm, the water is clear, the opening is right there, other people may be nearby, someone may have gone in before. The mind begins to believe the warning applies to other people, to careless people, to people who went too far. And perhaps the person tells themselves they will not go too far. That is the phrase temptation likes best, because it leaves the definition of too far until later. Later is not a good time to define it. The safe boundary should be set before entering, and for most people at Jacob's Well today, the boundary is simple because diving is prohibited and swimming has been closed due to conditions. But historically, when people did enter, the safest mindset would have been fixed in advance. Do not push, do not improvise, do not treat clear water as permission, do not treat previous success as proof, do not let curiosity rewrite the plan. These are not exciting rules, but exciting is not always helpful when the ceiling is made of rock. There is a quiet lesson here about the difference between beauty and friendliness. Clear water can be beautiful without being friendly. A cave can be fascinating without being welcoming. A spring can be calm without being safe. These distinctions matter because humans tend to read emotion into places. A sunny meadow feels kind. A dark alley feels threatening. A clear spring feels honest. But natural places are not making promises. They are only presenting conditions. It is our job to interpret them correctly. Jacob's Well presents conditions that change with depth. At the surface it is a spring. Below it is an overhead cave. Deeper in, it becomes a restricted, branching, dark system where the exit must be known and protected. Clear water does not remove the overhead rock. It does not add air. It does not widen the restrictions. It does not erase silt. It does not make a frightened person calm. It simply allows the first look to be beautiful. That is why the phrase, turns against you, should be understood carefully. The water is not an enemy. It does not turn in the way a person turns. It remains water, following pressure, gravity, flow, and the shape of the cave. What turns is the human situation. The same clarity that helped you see becomes the reason you entered. The same cold that felt refreshing becomes stress. The same depth that looked intriguing becomes distance from safety. The same cave that looked like a passage becomes a trap when the route out is uncertain. The environment does not need to become hostile. It only needs to stay exactly what it is while the person inside realizes too late what that means. And when that realization comes underwater, it can come fast. A diver who becomes disoriented may have only moments to stop the situation from getting worse. Air is limited. Visibility may be falling. The body is reacting. The mind is trying to solve several problems at once. In a narrow passage, even turning around may require care. Equipment can bump rock. Fins can disturb sediment. Hands may search for a line or wall. Every movement has consequences. The clear, quiet spring from above is now a closed environment where small decisions matter intensely. That is where Jacob's Well becomes most frightening. Not in the photograph, not at the edge, not in the first cool touch of water. It becomes frightening when the person inside understands that the exit is not simply up, that the cave does not open for them, that the air they brought is all they have, and that fear itself can consume what little time remains. This is the kind of danger that is hard to explain with a single warning sign, because it is not one danger. It is a system of dangers interacting with human behaviour. Cold water, limited air, overhead rock, narrow passages, silt, darkness, false routes, stress, pride, curiosity. Each one alone may be manageable in the right conditions. Together, they can become deadly. And still, above all of it, the surface may look peaceful. That contrast is what gives Jacob's Well its lasting hold on the imagination. It is not just that people died in a dangerous cave. It is that the entrance to that cave is so beautiful. It asks us to accept that a calm surface can belong to a severe environment. It reminds us that risk is not always obvious, and that our senses, while useful, are not complete. The eye can admire, the body can desire, the mind can imagine, but knowledge must have the final word. So, as we continue looking down into Jacob's Well, the question changes again. We are no longer asking only why clear water attracts people. we are beginning to see how the hidden structure below makes that attraction dangerous. The well is not only deep, it is shaped. It narrows, branches, and closes around the diver. The next part of the descent is not about the surface anymore. It is about the rooms and passages beneath it, the places where the water no longer feels open, and where the rock begins to decide how much space a human body is allowed to have. The rock begins to decide how much space a human body is allowed to have. That is one of the most important changes beneath Jacob's well. At the surface, the water appears open. A person can float, turn, look down, and still feel that the sky is nearby. There is room for arms, legs, breath, sunlight, and ordinary confidence. But below the entrance, the spring stops behaving like a pool and starts behaving like a cave. The space becomes shaped by limestone, not by human comfort. The walls narrow where the walls narrow, the floor rises where the floor rises. The ceiling lowers where the ceiling lowers. There is no negotiation. There is no helpful widening just because someone brought a tank, fins, and the belief that everything will probably be fine. Jacob's well is mapped as a submerged cave system, with more than 6,000 feet of underwater passage and a maximum depth of about 137 feet, and Hayes County describes it as having 15-inch restrictions, false exits, silty floors, no natural light, and no breathable air inside the cave system. That one sentence contains almost everything that makes the place dangerous, but each part deserves to be understood slowly. A restriction is not just a narrow place. It is a point where movement changes from swimming to fit-in. A false exit is not just a wrong turn. It is a shape in the rock that can look like hope when a person is already stressed. A silty floor is not just a dusty surface. It is stored blindness, waiting for one bad fin kick. No air is not just a technical note. It is the main fact of the entire environment. At the beginning, a person may still think of the cave as a tunnel. That word can make it sound simpler than it is. A tunnel in everyday life usually has an entrance and an exit. It may be long, dark, damp, or unpleasant, but it generally promises a direction. You go in one end and come out the other. The underwater system beneath Jacob's well is not a friendly public tunnel with lights, signs, and a suspicious smell of old concrete. It is a natural cave system. It has passages that extend and branch. The Jacob's Well Exploration Project describes a main passage called a tunnel, extending about 4,500 feet from the spring opening, and a smaller B-tunnel branching away for about 1,500 feet. These are mapped routes, but mapping does not make the cave easy. It only makes the shape better understood by people trained to understand it. To a diver, the first narrow section can change the mood of the whole dive. Open water allows large movements. A person can turn with space around them. Their equipment has room. Their fins have room. Their shoulders have room. A cave restriction removes that freedom. Now the body must be controlled carefully. The diver may need to angle themselves, keep equipment close, manage breathing, avoid bumping the ceiling or floor, and move without stirring sediment. In a place with 15-inch restrictions, even a small movement becomes meaningful. A tank can scrape. A fin can brush the floor. A hand can disturb silt. A moment of hurry can turn the passage into a cloud. The strange thing about narrow underwater spaces is that they can feel smaller than they are. On land, a tight gap is uncomfortable, but at least the body can stop and breathe without equipment. Underwater, every tight place carries the extra fact that the air is in the tank, the exit is behind, and the ceiling may not allow a direct rise. A narrow room is not just physically tight. It becomes mentally tight. The mind begins to notice every contact with the rock. The sound of breathing seems louder. The body becomes aware of its own size. Even a calm person can feel the sudden urge to get out quickly, and quickness is often exactly what the cave does not allow. That is where the cave can begin to take control of the pace. At the surface, a person chooses how fast to swim. In a narrow passage, the rock sets the speed. If the diver tries to move too fast, they may hit the wall, stir the floor, or create a problem with equipment. If they move too slowly, they may use more air and become more anxious. The correct pace is controlled, efficient, and calm, which is easy to describe from a comfortable chair and much harder to maintain in a dark underwater passage that appears to be shrinking around you like a bad decision made of limestone. This is why cave diving is a specialised discipline. It is not simply scuba diving with less sunlight. It requires training for overhead environments, guideline use, gas planning, low visibility, communication, and controlled movement. The entrance to Jacob's Well may be scenic, but the rooms beneath it do not care about scenery. They respond only to the diver's behaviour. Move carefully and the environment remains difficult but readable. Move badly and the cave can become harder very quickly. Silt is one of the most unforgiving parts of that hidden space. Fine sediment settles in quiet water because nothing has disturbed it for a while. It can make the floor look soft and harmless, but once disturbed it rises and spreads. In a narrow room, there is not much space for the cloud to disperse. It can fill the passage. The water that looked clear a few moments ago can become opaque. A diver may lose sight of the passage, the exit direction, a partner, a hand signal, or the guideline if they are not touching it. In open water, losing visibility is serious. In a cave, losing visibility can be the difference between a controlled exit and a fatal mistake. Clear water at the entrance can make this hard to imagine. The first view of Jacob's Well is often bright enough to show the shape of the opening. That brightness belongs to the surface and the first part of the descent. Farther in, the cave is not bright. There is no natural light source. A diver depends on lights, and lights only help if the water remains clear enough to reflect shape and distance. A light shining into heavy silt can become almost useless, turning the water in front of the diver into a glowing wall. It is like driving into fog with high beams on, except the fog is underwater, the road is a cave, and the car is your own body. The narrow rooms also create another problem. They make turning around harder. This sounds simple, but it matters. In open water, turning around is usually easy. You rotate and swim back. In a cave restriction, turning may require planning. The diver may have to back out, reverse carefully, or move through a section before finding space to turn. If panic appears, the body wants to spin, kick, push, and rush. The cave may not allow any of that. A person can become trapped not because the cave closes, but because their body, equipment, and fear no longer match the space available. False exits make the situation more confusing. Hays County lists false exits as one of the known hazards of the submerged cave system at Jacob's Well. A false exit is especially dangerous because it can look like a solution when a diver is already searching for one. A passage may rise. A chamber may open in a way that suggests it leads upward. A shape in the rock may seem familiar. Under stress, the brain wants answers quickly. It may choose the wrong one. A diver who follows the wrong opening can waste air, lose the real route, and move deeper into trouble while believing they are escaping it. That is one of the most unsettling things about underwater caves. They can make wrong decisions feel reasonable at the exact moment they are being made. The diver is not always thinking, "I am making a mistake." They may be thinking, "This must be the way." The cave's shape gives enough information to mislead, but not enough to guarantee understanding. That is why guidelines matter. A trained cave diver does not rely on memory or instinct alone. They maintain a continuous line to open water whenever appropriate, because the line is a physical truth in a place where visual judgment can fail. A person without that discipline may try to navigate by recognition. They may remember a rock shape, a turn, a room, a slope. But underwater, especially under stress, recognition is fragile. The way out often looks different from the way in. A passage that seemed obvious in one direction may seem unfamiliar in the other. A cloud of silt may erase landmarks. A light beam may change how shadows fall. Fear may narrow attention until the diver sees only one possible route, even if it is wrong. The cave does not need to be large to create this problem. It only needs to be complex enough to confuse a frightened person with limited air. The rooms beneath Jacob's Well are not rooms in the human sense. They do not have flat floors, square corners, doorways, or anything that suggests purpose for people. They are spaces left by water. They were shaped by flow, pressure, cracks, and dissolved limestone. The main passage is described as having deep sections separated by a shallower central portion, with the deepest point of the mapped system in the first deep section of a tunnel. To a map, that is information. To a diver, it is terrain. It means the route changes. It means depth and shape are not constant. It means the cave is not one simple descent. Depth adds pressure, and pressure changes the dive. Breathing gas is used faster at depth. Buoyancy changes must be managed. The diver must stay aware of equipment, air supply, position and route. At the same time, the cave walls may demand careful movement. This combination can become tiring. Physical effort rises, breathing increases, air disappears faster. A person who becomes anxious may breathe harder still, and now the clock is moving faster even if the cave looks unchanged. That is another quiet trap. The cave may seem still, but the diver's situation is changing every second. Air pressure in the tank drops. Stress can rise. Distance to the exit increases or decreases depending on direction. Visibility may improve or worsen. The same passage can be manageable at the beginning and dangerous later, not because the rock moved, but because the diver has fewer resources. A cave is not only measured in feet, it is measured in air, calm, visibility, and the ability to keep making good decisions. A narrow room takes away extra options. It leaves only the correct ones. That is why even experienced people respect caves. Experience does not make the cave harmless. It only helps a diver avoid creating problems and respond properly when problems appear. This distinction matters. People sometimes hear that experts explore places like Jacob's Well and think the danger must be exaggerated. But expert presence is not proof that a place is safe for everyone. A surgeon can perform surgery. That does not mean the rest of us should try it after watching 3 videos and feeling unusually confident. Specialised skill exists because some tasks punish improvisation. The history of Jacob's Well shows this clearly. Hayes County describes the Jacob's Well exploration project as a coalition of volunteer, self-funded cave divers formed in 2007 to conduct exploration and research, and says the project has produced detailed maps of the cave system. That kind of exploration is careful work. It is not the same as a recreational dare. It involves teams, procedures, training, and a reason beyond thrill. The cave can be studied, but it cannot be treated casually. The narrow rooms below the surface make the difference between seeing and entering very clear. From above, you see a shape. Inside, you become subject to that shape. The passage may force you close to the floor. It may push you near the ceiling. It may require a particular body angle. It may give you enough room to pass, but not enough room to pass badly. A person who is comfortable in open water may suddenly find that their usual movements are too large. Fins that worked well in open water now stir sediment. Hand movements that felt natural now scrape rock. Breathing that felt calm now sounds louder because the ceiling is close. This closeness changes the mind. It can make time feel shorter. It can make the exit feel farther away. It can make small inconveniences feel urgent. A dangling strap, a bumped valve, a light shifting in the hand, a tank touching the ceiling. Any of these can feel much larger in a restriction than they would in open water. The body reads close rock as a threat. It wants space. When space does not appear, anxiety can rise quickly. For a trained cave diver, this feeling is managed through practice. They have learned to control breathing, trim, buoyancy, fin movement, line contact, and problem solving. They have rehearsed failures. They have practiced exiting without sight. They have rules about gas reserves. They know that the cave is not the place to prove courage, it is the place to follow procedure. For an untrained person, the cave becomes a test they did not know they were taking until they are already in it. Jacob's Well is especially powerful as a warning because its surface and its interior are so different. The surface says, "Here is a beautiful spring." The interior says, "Here is a route that must be earned." That contrast is not obvious enough to prevent all mistakes. It is easy to imagine someone entering the first part and thinking the rest will be similar. But caves often do not become dangerous in a clean, obvious way. They change by degrees, wider to narrower, bright to dim, clear to silty, simple to branching, comfortable to tight, manageable to serious. By the time the change is undeniable, turning back may already require skill. The hidden rooms also remove many normal references. In open water, divers can use the surface, sunlight, bubbles, the bottom, and the open space around them to orient themselves. In a cave, those references may disappear. Bubbles may collect on the ceiling. Light may come only from the diver's own lamp. The bottom may not be flat. The passage may slope or twist. In silt, even near and far can become hard to judge. The world shrinks to what the hands, line, instruments and training can confirm. This is why the cave feels less like a place to explore and more like a place that must be navigated with discipline. Curiosity alone is not enough. Curiosity can get a person to the entrance. It cannot guarantee a safe exit. The narrow rooms beneath Jacob's Well require a person to understand the difference between wanting to know and being prepared to enter. The formation of the cave also means there may be places that look large enough until equipment is included. A human body alone might slip through a gap that a diver with gear cannot pass easily. Tanks, hoses, lights, gauges, fins, and other equipment add size and snag points. A passage that looks possible can become difficult when gear touches the walls. If a diver has to adjust equipment in a restriction, the situation becomes more complicated. If visibility drops during that moment, complicated becomes dangerous. Even without a complete blockage, the feeling of being stuck can trigger panic. A diver may not be truly trapped, but the body may believe it is. That belief can cause rushed movement. Rushed movement can wedge equipment, stir silt, or waste air. Now the fear creates the conditions it feared. This is one of the cruel loops in cave accidents. A manageable problem becomes worse because panic makes the person act in ways that reduce their chances. The cave does not punish panic on purpose. It has no purpose. It simply gives no extra room for panic to be harmless. That is a hard idea, but an important one. Many natural environments allow emotional mistakes to pass without serious consequence. You can become nervous on a trail, sit down, and recover. You can get confused in a park, check a map, and turn around. You can burn toast and try again, though the kitchen may judge you silently. In a submerged cave, the environment is much less tolerant. The time available to fix mistakes is limited. The space available to fix mistakes may be limited too. A narrow room turns every problem into a closer problem. The darkness adds another layer. No natural light means a diver's lights are not optional. They are part of survival. If a light fails, backups are needed. If lights are lost or visibility becomes zero, the exit depends on touch, line, memory of procedures, and calm. Darkness by itself is frightening, but darkness in water under rock is more than frightening. It removes the usual way humans understand space. Our eyes are our favourite navigational tools. When they're taken away, the brain becomes less confident, and less confidence can make every breath feel more urgent. This is why the phrase narrow rooms captures something important about Jacob's Well. It is not only a narrow tunnel, it is a series of spaces where a person can be both enclosed and uncertain. A room suggests somewhere you can enter, but a narrow underwater room offers no comfort of ordinary rooms. There is no air pocket, no chair, no door with a handle. No wall switch to turn on a light. No option to pause for a nice little think while leaning against a bookshelf. There is only water, rock, equipment, and the path back. In that path back lies the entire difference between exploration and disaster. The mapped cave system gives trained divers knowledge, but it does not make the cave forgiving. A map is not the cave. A map cannot show how a diver feels when squeezing through a restriction. It cannot show how quickly a silt cloud expands after one bad movement. It cannot show the body's reaction when a passage seems tighter on the return than it did on entry. It cannot show fear. It can guide planning, but the actual cave remains a physical environment with real limits. At Jacob's Well, those limits have been written into local rules and public understanding. Hayes County's current rules prohibit scuba diving at the natural area, and swimming has not been permitted since June 2022 because of low water levels and unsafe water conditions, with the county's 2026 visitor information still stating that swimming is not permitted at this time. These restrictions are not there to make the place less interesting. They are there because interest is not enough to keep people safe, and because the spring itself is sensitive. The narrow rooms beneath the surface are therefore part of two stories. One is the diving danger story, where the cave's shape, restrictions, silt, darkness, and lack of air create conditions that can kill. The other is the conservation story, where the same underground system depends on aquifer flow, drought conditions, and human water use. Jacob's Well is not only dangerous because people can go too far inside it, it is also vulnerable because the water that defines it can weaken. The Watershed Association describes Jacob's Well as a karst spring from the Middle Trinity Aquifer, and notes that drought cycles and groundwater pumping influence its flow. That means the cave is not separate from the world above it. The rooms beneath the surface are connected to rainfall, groundwater, land use, and the decisions people make far beyond the spring's edge. This may seem far from the image of a diver moving through a tight passage, but it is the same system. The water in the cave is the water in the aquifer. The spring at the surface is the cave's visible expression. The low-flow years are not just a park management detail. They are part of the well's present condition. Still, when thinking about the people who entered the cave, the human scale returns. A narrow room is not an aquifer model. It is a place where a person must fit. It is a place where someone may realise that the space ahead is smaller than expected and the space behind is now the only way home. It is a place where the body's need for air becomes more important than curiosity, pride, or adventure. It is a place where the cave's shape becomes personal. That is why this part of Jacob's Well feels so heavy. The danger is not dramatic in the way movies often make danger dramatic. There are no crashing walls, no sudden monsters, no villain, no countdown timer with red blinking lights, although a countdown timer would at least be honest about the air supply. The danger is physical and plain. Rock overhead, narrow passage, limited air, possible silt, wrong turns, fear. The cave does not need anything more, and above it all the spring can still look calm. That is the image that stays. The quiet surface, the clear water, and beneath it, rooms where the rules are completely different. A person standing above sees one place, a diver inside is in another. The transition between them can happen in just a few movements downward, but the consequences are enormous. Open sky becomes rock ceiling, simple swimming becomes controlled navigation, curiosity becomes commitment, the way back becomes the most important thing in the world. As the narrow rooms continue under the limestone, the story moves closer to the people who misjudged them. Not as names in a list and not as figures in a frightening legend, but as human beings who entered a beautiful place and found the hidden maze less forgiving than it looked. The next part of the descent is no longer only about the cave's shape. It is about what happened when real divers met those restrictions, those false exits, that silt, and the terrible distance between going in and coming back out. The next part of the descent is no longer only about the cave's shape. It is about what happened when real divers met those restrictions, those false exits, that silt, and the terrible distance between going in and coming back out. This is the point where Jacob's Well stops being only a natural feature and becomes a human story, not a legend, not a campfire tale, not one of those exaggerated travel warnings that makes every swimming hole sound as if it has personally developed a grudge against tourists. A real human story. Real people entered the water, real families waited above ground, real recovery divers had to follow them into the same difficult passages, carrying not curiosity but responsibility. And in a place as narrow and unforgiving as Jacob's Well, even responsibility can become dangerous. Hays County says at least 8 people lost their lives diving in Jacob's Well between 1960 and 1985, and its own fact summary also notes at least 9 scuba diving deaths from the 1960s through the 1980s. The same county material describes the cave as having 15-inch restrictions, false exits, silty floors, no air, and no light source. Those details matter because they tell us the deaths were not random. They happened in an environment where the hazards were built into the cave itself. The first thing to remember is that many of these divers were not trying to die. That sounds obvious, but it is important. People often talk about dangerous places as if the victims must have been foolish in some simple way. But most accidents are not simple while they're happening. A person begins with confidence, curiosity, training that may be real but incomplete, and a belief that they will stay within limits. Then the place tests those limits. One decision leads to the next. The cave narrows, visibility changes, air runs lower, the route becomes less clear. What looked like a daring but manageable dive becomes a problem with fewer and fewer ways out. Since the 1950s, scuba equipment allowed people to reach parts of Jacob's Well that breath-hold swimmers and early experimenters could not. The Jacob's Well Exploration Project notes that scuba brought renewed access to the depths, but those early recreational attempts often met a challenging and unforgiving environment, with several fatalities before modern trained cave diving research began. That is the pattern we see in many dangerous natural places. New equipment gives people new reach before culture, training, and rules fully catch up. A person gets farther than earlier visitors ever could, but farther is not always safer. Sometimes farther is exactly where the old margin disappears. One of the most painful parts of Jacob's Well's history involves not only the divers who died, but the people who went in after them. Recovery diving is different from exploration. The purpose is grim. There is no thrill in it. There is no casual adventure. The diver is entering a known dangerous place to bring someone back, or to try. And that task adds emotional pressure to an already technical problem. It is hard enough to navigate tight flooded passages with a clear plan and calm purpose. It is another thing to do it while carrying the weight of a family's grief above the surface. A 2001 article by Louis Bond reported that local dive shop owner Don Dibble, an experienced diver, recovered many victims from Jacob's Well and nearly died during a 1979 recovery dive. He had been trying to retrieve the remains of 2 young divers from Pasadena, Kent Maupin and Mark Brashire, when he became trapped in sliding gravel in the 3rd chamber. The article says he was buried past his waist, ran out of air, and was rescued by other divers, but suffered severe injury during the rapid ascent. That is a difficult scene to sit with, so we will not rush through it. A recovery diver went in with experience and purpose, and the cave nearly took him too. That tells us something important about Jacob's Well. It was not dangerous only to the careless. It was dangerous even to those who understood much more than the average visitor. The 3rd chamber was not a dramatic movie set. It was a small underwater room with unstable gravel, tight space, and limited options. A person in that situation does not need a cave-in or a sudden current to be in trouble. The material under them can shift. The body can become pinned. Air can run out. The entire problem can form in the space of ordinary seconds. After that kind of incident, people tried to keep divers out of the deeper passages. According to Bond's article in January 1980, Dibble attempted to seal the dangerous depths by building a grate of rebar and quickset concrete at the entrance to the third chamber. 6 months later, he found the grate dismantled, and divers had left a note saying they could not be kept out. It is a small detail, but a revealing one. The danger did not erase the attraction. For some people, it may have sharpened it. A barrier became a challenge. A warning became a dare, and there are few combinations more dangerous than a cave, limited air and human pride. This is not said to judge people from a comfortable distance. It is said because the pattern is recognisable. Humans do not always respond to danger by moving away. Sometimes danger becomes part of the appeal. A place gains a reputation, and the reputation becomes a magnet for people who want to prove they are different from those who came before. The mind says, they went too far, but I will not. They panicked, but I will stay calm. They were unlucky, but I will be careful. And perhaps all of that feels true at the surface. But the cave does not measure intentions. It measures what happens when air, space, visibility and judgment are tested at the same time. Jacob's Well also had places that could mislead even a determined diver. The second chamber, described in Bond's article as a long funnel down toward a restricted opening, contained what was known as a false chimney. It appeared to offer a way out, but it was not the exit. Southwest Texas State University student Richard Patton died there in 1983 after being trapped in that false chimney. That phrase, false chimney, is quiet and horrible. It sounds almost harmless if you do not picture it carefully. A chimney, in cave language, can suggest an upward passage, a way out, a possible route toward air. In a flooded cave, an upward-looking space can become a promise the rock never made. Imagine being underwater, already committed with air limited and the need to leave becoming urgent. You see what looks like a path upward. The body wants up, the brain wants up, every instinct says air is above. But in Jacob's Well, above may not be the open surface. Above may be more rock, more water, and a route that leads nowhere useful. That is not just a wrong turn. That is hope taking the shape of a trap. The danger of a false exit is not only physical, it is psychological. A person who thinks they have found the way out may keep going when they should stop. They may spend precious air in the wrong space. They may become more wedged, more disoriented, more frightened. And once fear begins, the body starts using air faster. Panic is expensive underwater. It burns through time. It turns clear thinking into short, urgent thoughts. Move, get out, go up, faster. But in a cave, faster can be the wrong answer. Faster can stir silt. Faster can cause equipment to hit rock. Faster can make a tight place tighter. There is a heavy sadness in knowing that the cave offered these shapes without meaning to. The false chimney did not intend to deceive. The gravel did not intend to trap. The silt did not intend to blind. But intention does not matter much in a submerged cave. A harmless-looking formation can still be deadly if a human being reads it incorrectly at the wrong moment. In 2000, trained divers entered the cave to record and map parts of the system. During that work, the San Marcos Area Recovery Team found remains believed to belong to Kent Maupin in the fourth chamber area, more than 100 feet below the surface. Bond's article describes diver Dan Misiaszek spotting bones, a corroded scuba tank, a wet suit, and a patch connected with Maupin's hometown diving association. The team left the scene intact at first, but after filming, the divers accidentally stirred silt, creating a blackout so severe that they abandoned the camera and followed the guideline out while relying on training. That detail is one of the clearest examples of why Jacob's Well is so dangerous. These were trained divers. They had a team. They had a guideline. They had a plan. And still, one silt event turned the cave into a place where up, down, left, right, and even gauges could become hard to read. The article quotes Kathy Misiaszek describing how visibility was lost so badly that the divers had nothing to fall back on except training. For a person without that training, the same blackout could be final, not because the cave becomes larger or deeper in that moment, but because the usable world becomes smaller. Sight disappears, orientation disappears, the exit becomes a thing you must know by touch, line, and procedure. The body wants certainty, and the cave gives none. That is why the deaths at Jacob's Well cannot be understood simply as people going too deep. Depth was part of it, yes. But the deadlier issue was the combination of depth, overhead rock, confusing passages, false routes, unstable material, and limited air. There is another name often connected with the later part of the fatal history, Wainwood Russell. Bond's article describes him as the well's last known victim, an Austin mail carrier who was experienced as a topside caver and an open water diver, but who had not attempted cave diving before. That distinction matters. A person can be comfortable underground and comfortable underwater, yet still not be prepared for both at once. Dry caving and open water scuba each require skill, but submerged cave diving combines the most unforgiving parts of both. The cave removes open ascent. The water removes breathable air. The darkness removes easy orientation. The narrow passages remove freedom of movement. It is not one challenge added to another. It is a new environment altogether. This is where Jacob's Well becomes a lesson in boundaries. Skill is not universal. Experience in one kind of danger can make a person feel ready for another kind, but that feeling may be wrong. A strong swimmer is not a cave diver. An open water diver is not automatically a cave diver. A dry caver is not automatically prepared for flooded restrictions. A person may be brave, fit, smart, and experienced, and still be missing the exact training the environment demands. The cave does not grade on effort. It does not say, well, you have done difficult things before, so here is a little extra mercy. It simply remains itself. The divers who never came back were not all the same. They came at different times with different backgrounds, different levels of experience, different reasons for entering. Some were young, some had equipment, some had companions, some may have believed they knew the route, some may have gone beyond a barrier, some may have met a restriction, a false exit, or a silt out at the worst possible moment. Their stories are not identical, but they share one place and one final problem. They entered an underwater system where returning was harder than entering. That is one of the oldest traps in exploration. Going in feels active. Coming out feels assumed. At the start, people are focused on discovery, on depth, on the view ahead. The way back is imagined as the same path in reverse. But in Jacob's Well, the way back could become altered by silt, stress, air use, and the body's own rising fear. The same passage does not feel the same when the tank is lower, the light is worse, the heart is faster, and the mind is no longer curious but afraid. It is easy to talk about fatal accidents in a way that turns people into examples. We should be careful not to do that too much. Each person had a life larger than the mistake or circumstance that ended it. They were not born to become warnings. They became warnings because the place was unforgiving, and because the story had to be told afterward. That is the uncomfortable duty of stories like this. To respect the dead by not turning away from what killed them. There is a reason recovery divers, researchers, and local officials became so serious about Jacob's Well. It was not only the number of deaths, it was the pattern. The well kept attracting people beyond safe recreational limits. Its entrance was accessible. Its water was clear. Its reputation grew. The cave's danger did not keep everyone out. In some cases, it may have drawn them in. That is why rules eventually had to become stronger than suggestion. Today, Hayes County rules prohibit scuba diving at Jacob's Well Natural Area, and current visitor information says swimming has not been permitted since June 2022 because of low water levels and unsafe water conditions. Those rules can sound strict if someone only sees the surface, but after hearing the history, they sound less like restrictions and more like memory made practical. A rule is sometimes a scar written in plain language. No scuba diving, no entry beyond the safe boundary, no treating the well as a personal challenge. Behind a short rule can be years of grief, recovery dives, close calls, and hard lessons learned underwater. The Jacob's Well exploration project continued the work in a different way. Trained cave divers began modern underwater exploration in 2000, and the project was formally organised in 2007 as a volunteer, self-funded team conducting research, mapping and public education. The project reports that it has documented about 6,000 feet of passages and 2 principal conduits, and that its members use standard cave diving procedures with additional team requirements, including advanced qualifications and specialised configurations for narrow restrictions. That is what respect looks like in practice. Not fear alone, not avoidance alone. Training, planning, mapping, limits, a purpose beyond thrill. The same cave that killed unprepared or unlucky divers could be studied by teams who treated every passage as a serious problem to be managed. Even then, the danger did not disappear. It was only approached with the level of care it demanded. That difference is important. Jacob's Well is not a place that proves humans should never be curious. It proves curiosity must be disciplined when the environment is unforgiving. There is something deeply human in the way the well has moved through these stages. First a spring, then a swimming place, then a mystery, then a diving challenge, then a deadly site, then a protected natural area, then a research subject, then a conservation warning. Human attention changed as the consequences became clearer. The well itself did not need to change much for those meanings to shift. The same opening could be a playground to one generation, a dare to another, a tragedy to families, and a research site to trained divers. That is how places gather history. They do not gather it evenly. They gather it through use, loss, memory, and rules. When thinking of the divers who never came back, the mind may picture the final moments too vividly. It is better to be gentle with that. We do not need to imagine every detail to understand the danger. It is enough to know that underwater panic is lonely, that the route out must be known, that air is finite, and that in Jacob's Well clear water can become darkness in seconds. The important lesson is not horror. The important lesson is respect. Respect means understanding that a place can be beautiful and still not be available to us. It means accepting that some openings should be looked into, studied by experts, protected by rules, and left alone by everyone else. It means refusing to turn someone else's death into a thrill. It means remembering that the people who died were not characters in a scary story. They were sons, friends, students, workers, divers, people with ordinary lives above ground. And above ground is where the story feels most painful. The surface of Jacob's Well is quiet. The trees still move in the wind. The limestone still warms in the sun. Visitors still walk the trails. People still look down into the opening and feel the old pull of curiosity. But for families connected to the deaths, that water is not just scenery. It is the last place someone went. A beautiful natural spring became the boundary between before and after. That kind of meaning does not show up in photographs. You have to know the story to see it. The recovered equipment and old accounts also leave a strange impression. A tank, a wetsuit, a patch, a camera recording blackness until the tape ran out. These are ordinary objects made heavy by context. A scuba tank is normally a tool of exploration. In Jacob's Well, some became evidence of where a person stopped. A camera is normally used to bring back images. In that blackout, it became a silent witness left in the cave. These details are difficult because they make the danger physical. They remind us that accidents are not abstract. They involve straps, hoses, lights, gauges, gravel, silt, and human bodies trying to move through spaces that do not make room for panic. By the time recreational scuba diving halted after the mid-1980s deaths, a near-fatal recovery attempt, the lesson had become impossible to ignore. Hays County describes that moment as a turning point, when the local diving community helped spread awareness and recreational scuba diving at Jacob's Well stopped. The well had taken enough. Or, more precisely, people had finally accepted that it had always required more respect than casual diving could provide. That acceptance is not the end of the story, because Jacob's Well still asks something of us, not only about diving, but about how we approach natural places in general. The most dangerous thing at the edge of a place like this is not always ignorance. Sometimes it is partial knowledge. Knowing a little can make a person feel safer than knowing nothing. A little diving experience, a little local familiarity, a little confidence, a little story about someone who went in and came back. But a little is not enough in an underwater cave. A little knowledge can open the door. It cannot guarantee the return. So the divers who never came back remain part of Jacob's Well's warning, not as a grim attraction, but as a record of what happens when beauty, curiosity and risk meet inside a space that does not forgive mistakes. Their stories explain why the rules exist, why trained exploration looks so different from recreational daring, and why the well should be approached with quiet seriousness. The water at the surface may still look calm. The opening may still pull the eye downward. The mind may still wonder what lies beyond the visible blue. But now that wonder has names attached to it, it has recovery attempts, it has silt blackouts, it has broken barriers, false exits, and divers who had every intention of coming back. And from that knowledge, the story begins to settle into its final shape. Jacob's Well is not only a beautiful place where people died. It is a beautiful place that teaches the cost of underestimating nature. It teaches that danger can be quiet. It teaches that clear water is not the same as safe water. It teaches that some places must be protected from our impulses, and sometimes from our love. As we rise back toward the surface, away from the narrow rooms and the names tied to them, what remains is not only fear, but a steadier kind of respect. The kind that lets a person stand at the edge, look down, and decide that looking is enough. And from that knowledge, the story begins to settle into its final shape. Jacob's Well is not only a beautiful place where people died, it is a beautiful place that teaches the cost of underestimating nature. It teaches that danger can be quiet. It teaches that clear water is not the same as safe water. It teaches that some places must be protected from our impulses and sometimes from our love. As we rise back toward the surface, away from the narrow rooms and the names tied to them, what remains is not only fear, but a steadier kind of respect. The kind that lets a person stand at the edge, look down, and decide that looking is enough. That may sound simple, but simple lessons are not always easy to follow. We are curious creatures. We want to touch the old stone, lean over the edge, test the cold water, and look into the dark opening until our mind fills in what our eyes cannot see. Jacob's Well understands that part of us very well, even though it does not understand anything in the human sense. It sits there, quiet in the limestone, and lets people bring their own meanings to it. To one person, it is a natural wonder. To another, it is a dangerous cave. To another, it is a childhood memory. To another, it is a conservation problem. To someone who lost a person there, it is something much heavier than a landmark. The place stays the same in its basic shape, but the meaning changes depending on who is standing at the edge. And that is one reason it is so hard to reduce Jacob's Well to a single kind of story. If we call it only deadly, we miss the clear water, the trees, the creek, the geology, the long underground route of the aquifer, and the ordinary human joy that once gathered around it on hot days. If we call it only beautiful, we miss the restrictions, the false exits, the silt, the darkness, the divers who never came back, and the rules written after years of hard experience. The truth is wider than either version. Jacob's Well is beautiful and dangerous. It is inviting and unforgiving. It is fragile and famous. It is a place where nature's quiet workmanship created something people wanted to enter, photograph, study, protect, and sometimes challenge, with very different results. Respect begins when we allow all of those facts to exist at the same time. A respectful view of Jacob's Well does not need to make the spring into a monster. It is not a villain hiding under blue water. It is not angry. It is not cursed. It is not waiting for the next careless person with a little notebook and a very dramatic pencil. It is a spring connected to an aquifer, a cave system shaped by limestone and water, a headwater of Cypress Creek, and a protected natural area in Wimberley, Texas. Hays County describes Jacob's Well Natural Area as an 81-acre park established to preserve and protect the sensitive area above and below the ground, with Jacob's Well forming the headwaters of Cypress Creek and scuba diving prohibited there. The same county information also says cave divers have mapped more than 6,000 feet of underwater passage, with a maximum depth of 137 feet. Those details are calm on the page, but they carry weight when you picture the place. More than 6,000 feet of underwater passage begins with a small opening that many people first see as a pretty blue circle. A maximum depth of around 137 feet begins with a surface that may look like a swimming hole. A cave with narrow restrictions and false exits begins with water clear enough to make the first look feel friendly. That is the gap where danger lives, not always in what is hidden completely, but in what is partly visible and partly misunderstood. Jacob's Well lets the eye see just enough to become interested. The rest requires knowledge, caution, and, for almost everyone, a firm decision not to go farther. There is a kind of maturity in that decision. It is not dramatic. It will not make a thrilling story at a party, unless the party is full of cave divers, hydrologists, and people who appreciate excellent judgment, in which case you may be the most popular person near the snack table. But choosing not to enter can be the strongest kind of respect. It says, I do not need to prove myself to this place. It says, the water does not owe me an experience. It says, other people have learned the hard way, and I am willing to learn without adding another name to the warning. That is not cowardice. That is wisdom with dry shoes. Natural places often teach us this, if we let them. A mountain can be beautiful without needing to be climbed in bad weather. A river can be beautiful without needing to be crossed during a flood. A cave can be beautiful without needing to be entered by someone untrained. A clear spring can be beautiful without needing to become a dare. We sometimes confuse restraint with missing out, but restraint can be a way of seeing more clearly. It removes the need to conquer the place and leaves room to understand it. Jacob's Well has already given people much to understand. It shows how water can shape stone over long periods. It shows how a karst spring connects the surface to the hidden world below. It shows how an aquifer can support a creek, a community, and a local sense of place. It shows how drought and groundwater demand can weaken something people once assumed would always flow. Current Hays County visitor information says swimming is not permitted at this time, updated for 2026, and that swimming has not been permitted since June 2022 because of low water levels and unsafe water conditions. That part of the story is quieter than the diving deaths, but it matters just as much. A spring can be dangerous because of what lies beneath it. It can also be vulnerable because of what happens around it. Drought, pumping, development, rainfall, recharge, and conservation all shape the future of Jacob's Well. If the aquifer weakens, the spring weakens. If the spring weakens, Cypress Creek feels the loss. If the creek feels the loss, the surrounding life and human uses feel it too. The well is not separate from the landscape. It is a visible point in a larger system, and systems do not stay healthy just because people admire them. That may be the most grown-up lesson Jacob's Well offers. Loving a place is not the same as protecting it. People can love a place too hard. They can crowd it, enter it, damage it, overuse the water that feeds it, ignore rules, and still say they love it. Real care often looks quieter. Staying on trails, respecting closures, not swimming when conditions are unsafe, not diving where diving is prohibited, supporting conservation, listening to the people who monitor the land and water, letting the spring recover when it needs to recover, rather than demanding that it serve every summer memory on command. That last part can be difficult because places like Jacob's Well become personal. A person may remember jumping into the cold water years ago. They may remember bringing their children there. They may remember the first time they looked down into the blue opening and felt that strange mixture of excitement and unease. When access changes, it can feel like something has been taken away. But a protected place is not only a service for visitors, it is a living and geological system with limits. Sometimes the most respectful thing we can do is accept that the place is not ready for what we want from it. There is a good kind of sadness in that acceptance, not hopeless sadness, more like the feeling of leaving a room quietly because someone inside is resting. The spring does not need our disappointment. It needs water, time, and care. It needs people to understand that the famous image of Jacob's Well, full and clear and bright, depends on conditions that cannot be forced. A few days of rain may bring a brief rise, but brief relief is not the same as recovery. Local reporting in May 2026 described short-lived flow returning after rain, followed by another decline, while the site remained closed to swimming. So Jacob's Well teaches respect in two directions. Downward, into the cave, where respect means not entering what you're not trained, equipped, and allowed to enter. Outward, into the watershed, where respect means understanding that water is not endless just because it appears at the surface. One lesson protects human life. The other protects the spring itself. Both are connected by the same idea. Clear water is not simple. If you were standing there now, looking into the well, you might feel all of this at once. The beauty would still be there. The dark opening would still draw the eye. The limestone would still hold the edge. The trees would still make the scene feel calmer than the history behind it. But the water would no longer look like only a pretty place. It would look like a boundary, a place where surface and depth meet. A place where curiosity must stop before it becomes entitlement. A place where the safest act may be to stand still, look carefully and let the question remain below. There is something peaceful about that, if you let it be peaceful. We do not need to solve every mystery by entering it. We do not need to put our bodies into every place that interests us. Sometimes the world gives us a view and asks us to be satisfied with learning. That can be enough. More than enough, really. A person can understand Jacob's Well without touching the cave. They can understand the diver's warnings without repeating their mistakes. They can understand the beauty without possessing it. They can understand the danger without turning it into entertainment. That balance is the heart of the story. The divers who died at Jacob's Well are part of its memory, but they are not there to make the place thrilling. Their stories are there to make the place honest. They remind us that confidence can run ahead of preparation. They remind us that water removes options quickly. They remind us that a cave does not forgive simply because someone meant to be careful. They remind us that the way back is the real measure of any descent. And they remind us that warning signs are not decorations. They are often grief translated into public language. When you think of a sign that says no scuba diving, it may seem blunt. But behind it are recovery dives, frightened families, divers following lines through silt, old equipment found in dark rooms, and people who entered with every expectation of returning. A rule like that is not there to spoil wonder. It is there to keep wonder from turning into mourning. It tells us that the place has already taught this lesson at great cost. And still, Jacob's Well is not only a place of loss. That matters too. If we focus only on the deaths, we make the spring smaller than it is. The well is also a place of science, conservation and careful exploration. Trained teams have mapped and studied the cave. Park staff and conservation groups have worked to protect the land. Visitors still come to walk, learn, photograph and observe. The story has not ended in tragedy. It has changed into stewardship. That is a better ending than fear alone. Stewardship is not as dramatic as danger, but it lasts longer. It is the patient work of keeping a place from being loved to death. It means remembering that natural areas are not amusement parks, even when they attract visitors. It means treating a spring as part of an aquifer instead of only as a swimming spot. It means letting expert knowledge guide public access. It means accepting that a beautiful place may need limits. Limits can feel like loss in the moment, but they are often how a place survives. And maybe that is the gentlest way to understand Jacob's Well now. It is a place of limits. The limit between surface and cave, the limit between curiosity and risk, the limit between use and overuse, the limit between memory and present conditions, the limit between what humans want and what the land can safely give. These limits do not make the well less beautiful. They give its beauty shape. They remind us that a place can be precious partly because it cannot be treated casually. As our thoughts return to the surface, we can leave the cave where it belongs, under the limestone, mapped by experts and respected by everyone else. We can leave the narrow rooms in darkness. We can leave the false exits untested. We can leave the silt settled. We can leave the old tragedies with the seriousness they deserve. And we can stand beside the water not as conquerors of a dangerous place, but as guests beside something older, quieter, and less interested in our confidence than we might like. There is comfort in that role. Being a guest means we do not have to prove anything. We can look, we can listen, we can learn the names of the creek, the aquifer, the rock, and the people who tried to understand the cave. We can respect the rules. We can let the spring be more than a photograph. We can allow it to remain partly unknown. So, dear listener, as we come back from this slow journey through clear water and hidden stone, let me ask you gently, as we did near the beginning, where are you listening from tonight? Are you near water of your own, perhaps a river, a lake, an ocean, or just the quiet little glass on your bedside table that has somehow become the most responsible object in the room? Have you ever looked into a deep place and felt that small pull of curiosity, followed by the wiser feeling that the edge was close enough? If this story gave you a little calm, a little wonder, or a little more respect for the quiet dangers of the natural world, I'd be grateful if you gave the video a like and subscribed. It helps this small space reach other people who enjoy slow stories about science, history, nature, and the strange places where beauty and caution meet, and perhaps share it with someone who loves hidden springs, caves, or swimming holes, especially the kind of person who says, "I'll only look for a second," while already leaning much too far forward. Jacob's Well will remain there in the Texas limestone, whether full or low, flowing or weakened, famous or quiet. The entrance will still hold its dark shape. The cave will still continue below. The stories will still gather around it. And for those who know what happened there, the place will never be only pretty again. It will be beautiful in a deeper, more serious way. Because it has taught us what beauty alone cannot teach. It has taught us that nature does not need to be loud to be powerful. It has taught us that curiosity needs humility beside it. It has taught us that sometimes the safest, kindest, most respectful thing we can do is stop at the edge. So tonight, as the room settles around you and the day finally loosens its grip, let Jacob's Well become a quiet image in the mind. Clear water, pale stone, a dark opening beneath the surface, trees above, the hidden cave below, a place that does not ask to be feared as much as understood, a place that reminds us to move gently through the world, to listen when a landscape carries warnings, and to leave some depths undisturbed. Sleep well, fellow traveller, wherever you're listening from, Stay warm, stay safe, and when you meet a beautiful place with darkness beneath it, may you have the wisdom to admire it, respect it, and let it keep its secrets.